I'd like to call the meeting to order. If everybody can grab their seats, we're going to begin. We do have quorum. This may be a two-gavel morning. Can I call this meeting to order, please? It's a two-gavel meeting today, Mike. Well, we'll see. No, I think it's only a two-gavel meeting. We're good.
Come on.
Yeah. Anyway, we do have quorum. I'd like to resume. I know she's trained me well. I'd like to resume the 14th meeting of the Budget Committee. Today, we're going to be hearing presentations on staff recommended budgets for the accountability officers, the Infrastructure and Development Service Group, and the Toronto Police Service. We're also going to have an opportunity to ask questions of the Toronto Police Services Board, Toronto Police Services Parking Enforcement Unit, and the Toronto Atmospheric Fund. The presentation schedule is available at the back of the room for anybody who wants it. At the end of today's presentations and questions, we're going to recess and reconvene again tomorrow morning to continue hearing more presentations and asking more questions. Again, I just want to remind members that if you have any motions or requests for briefing notes, to get them or submit them as soon as possible to the clerk. And these motions, with your permission, are going to be shared with myself and the Executive Director. We will make we'll vote on them all tomorrow after we're finished. Recognizing Friday is, with the sundown clause, we have to be done by, I believe, 2:30 or 3:30. So we want to be able to get to that, and I want to have it organized well enough so we don't have to go beyond that, depending on how we tomorrow goes. As this is a multi-day meeting, we'll be taking I'm just repeating myself here, so I won't have to say that. Are there any questions before we begin from any members? Great. So why don't we begin? We're actually going to be starting with the accountability officers. The four different areas are going to be coming up. They'll be doing presentations individually, and then we'll be asking questions after that. So I believe the first up will be the Auditor General. Welcome.
Good morning, Budget Chief and Committee. I have a slide deck of about 16 slides. There was also a budget report that was prepared and given to the Audit Committee in October, along with a work plan. But the budget is deferred until this process happens. So you have a budget report, you have budget notes. Of the 16 slides, I'm going to go over five or six of them. But we're available for as much detail and discussion as you require. So the nature of our office, as you know, relates to bringing a transparent picture of what's happening to assure City Council that what you want to happen is actually happening. And so if we focus on outcomes, it relates to that assurance, but the byproduct of that is helping to identify areas of improvement that can help make sure that the city's monies are spent as you intend them to be spent. So this year we've had a number of audits, and the outcomes of those audits relate to TTC, identifying opportunities to reduce fare evasion. Also, the contract with Metrolinx. There's been a change in the process and the dance there because we've been able to highlight some opportunities within that contract. Things like the wait list and identification of vacancies and helping to make sure they get filled. That would be an example where there would be a quantification in the future if we can reduce the vacancy rate, because those would be units that you would normally have to build in order to put people in. But also the non-quantifiable benefit is getting people from the homeless shelters into a bachelor unit, or getting somebody who's on a wait list for a while with a family into a unit, and that's the non-quantifiable benefit. Tree maintenance, asset management, electronic billing, change management and engineering, revitalization. That was an area where Councillor Fletcher felt that the audit report was really helpful to inform the revitalization and the affordable housing discussion. So there's been a lot of audits. There's been 15 audits and investigation reports and a number of recommendations. And it's not about we are only one piece of a catalyst of change. Management takes this on and really makes the change happen, so it's very good. The next slide I'll go to relates to our key risks and coming up. So there's a key risk area that I'm not going to discuss in detail, and we can have in-camera discussion, but essentially, cybersecurity, the world has changed. Since October 2018, the federal government has a national department that assists with identification of cyber risks, and we've taken that and applied that lens over the City of Toronto, and we're helping to identify key risk areas and key systems, and the City Council wants me to continue with that work and identify as quickly as possible any high-risk areas of key infrastructure while the city is getting underway with their cyber program. The other risk area is fraud and waste. This year, because of cyber change in our systems, we've changed our, updated and changed our system of how we manage complaints. We have some backlog of some complaints. And the other thing we found is as we were doing our audits this year, we had to invest more fraud and waste resources. So for example, with RGI, we had to send teams over the city to verify some of the files because we found some fraud in there that the city needed to know about to make sure that, or fraud, a risk of fraud, so we can plug those holes. Tree maintenance would be another one where we had to invest some of our fraud and waste resources. And the use of experts. So in an audit world, you plan for your resources, but you need to use experts and specialists as they come in as part of the standards. So, and to address our emerging risks, we have identified in our budget a bit more that we would require. For the very first time since the audit's been formed, police has invited us in for a risk assessment, and that is new. We're going to do a cyber risk assessment, but also we're going to do a police-wide risk assessment. Priority actions. When we're asking for your continued support, and we're saying that 1/20th of 1% is our budget. We have 1/20th of 1%. We're asking for the same thing, and a temporary increase to address the needs that have come up following our October 2018 report to the Audit Committee, which are the cyber needs and some of these fraud needs. You know, we're really, I think we're funded at the right level. I think it's lean. But I think it's not something that, I think it's something that we can work with. It was just that temporary increase this year to address some of those cyber risks and the police assessment, and then we won't need that next year. In our, where the money goes. So 92% of our budget goes to staff. The rest, about 200,000, oh, actually more, about 400,000, goes to professional services, also audit and investigation software, and training. So that's all outlined on the current wheel. So essentially, most of the money goes to staff, and we've had to rebuild the office because there's been a lot of retirements, and we've been doing the training to make sure that happens. This slide, I'm going to point out a couple of numbers here. The 2019 projected actuals, it has a number in there of 890,000. That's actually about $200,000 higher than what it actually is. It was a projection, but some of the projects actually spilled into 2020. So we didn't spend what we thought we were going to spend because the work was delayed. So actually, we have a piece of that relates to the audit software, about 200,000, Ina, is about 200,000. Do you want to just... yeah. So on the wheel, you'll see the audit software expenses, and then there's some training. So this accounts for most of it. The other bit what relates to contracts for specialists, cyber, real estate, things that we needed to conduct the audits, forensics, things like that. Last year, there was about $1 million that we said was temporary that we needed to have flexibility on. We didn't staff with it. So what we did was we used that for specialists to do specialist audits, like cyber, you know, I won't discuss which ones, I can in camera, but we took those and we put that money into those areas, and we've put everything on a fast track so that any high risks will be identified and eliminated in the next little while. So that's what we've done. So essentially, it's not that number, it's about 600,000. only about 400,000 was related to some specialists, and then the rest relates to, software, training, those kinds of things. So we can provide more detail around that and as much as you need. So the final slide relates to just giving you a high-level summary. Our budget's it is $6.7 million. That's 1/20th of 1% of what the city budget is. It's a 0.05% of the city budget. And when you add in the extra piece for cyber and those key areas this year, it's 0.55. 92% of the budget is salaries and benefits. We are addressing some high risk because of some backlog in the fraud related to implementing a new system that was at risk, and some cyber. And so we need some flexibility, but we feel we can work within that if you support us in this way to make sure we get this done. So we've produced value. We have used our budget wisely, and going forward, we feel that the city will continue to get value throughout its organization with our work. Any questions?
Questions? Councillor Nunziata.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I'm very pleased that the Service Board has invited you to do the full risk assessment, and this will be the first time for the police services, correct?
Yes, I can barely hear you. Is your mic on?
Yeah, it's on, yeah.
So your question is, this is the first time
Yeah.
police service invited in? Correct. We would be asked to do a specific project, but never has the office been able to do a full risk assessment to identify key projects that will help to bring value to the police force and to the city, and then cyber on top of that. So it's the first time.
So you'll be starting that in this year?
Clearances are happening immediately. We're already halfway through.
Okay.
Clearances.
Now, and thank you very much for your presentation. But I remember, I think it was a year ago that I had asked, and I'm just asking when we will be seeing that in the budget, on the recommendations that you bring forward when you do your audits for the various departments, that you identify potential savings in some of the recommendations. Some of them have been implemented, some of them have not. And I had requested that when we go through the budget process, if we can see those projected savings and the savings that have been achieved in each budget that comes forward, a separate line item. So when will we be seeing that?
Just as an introduction, I think that's a very important initiative. I know that the budget group also with Stephen Conforti does agree with that. The challenge in the past, with the budget timing, we were able to do it. The change this year slowed it down a bit as far as the quantification, because what happens is a unit identifies costs and benefits, and then we go in and re-audit and re-verify. So Stephen Conforti and I have met, and Heather is aware, and basically, I think you're aware, and basically what we're going to do is feed it into the budget process immediately. So right after this, now that the budget process has stabilized, we're going to add that piece in. So I'm hoping by the next audit committee, probably in May, that we'll have more information. But if there was a change this year, and so the divisions weren't as ready, so we're going to work with Stephen to get that built in to feed in. So for next year, it should be fed in, but we'll be looking at the back piece. So we did it for 2018. This year with the change, it didn't quite come as quickly because we have to go in and audit. So for example, TTC identified a potential saving of $7 million in their budget related to, we have to go back, verify, wait for that to happen, wait for a year or two, is that stabilized?
Right.
And then we'll bring it in.
And then we could see
it takes some time.
Yeah.
So we want to work with the divisions more to make that happen. And with Stephen on board, the new team, the new budget, we're going to build that in. But that would be an example where they believe it's happening, but I want to make sure that it is before we report it. So we have a little delay right now.
Right, because I think it's important, because when being on the audit committee, you see the the savings, potential savings, and some of them, you're absolutely correct, it will probably take a year or two before you can actually see them. But, you know, for example, the tree pruning and TTC, it's important to me that when we go through the budget, that we actually see the savings that were achieved through those recommendations from the various departments, so we know that there was savings and that they've taken those savings and included it, part of their budget. Would you have, this is something I don't need now, but in the past 4 years in all your audits, because I know that there's been a number of recommendations and, you know, a lot of savings that we have, you have been able to identify the total amount of the savings overall that you've been, that you've had during your audit.
We have a projection. So what happens is when there is something that's identified for this year, and as long as things look stable, we will project that over a 5-year period. So the projection is based on what we've seen, not counting the non-quantifiable benefits like cybersecurity and those kinds of things, or is about right now from last year is about $300 million over a 5-year period. And it adjusts every year. It'll go up and down. But you take, if, for example, more money would be brought in by TTC, once we verify that and we can see it's trending, then we will say, okay, what would that be over 5 years? So that would be it. But we, you know, we can provide more information as much as you need.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, it's a question that I'll be relating back to with the other AOs later. You highlighted that well, the budget's pretty good and you've got the same positions as last year. That there is, in some instances, some of the investigations you're doing, there's going to be an increasing need for outside experts to come in for some contract work in specialist areas. Is that accounted for in next year's budget? And in your view, is it something that if we're going to have these small units for AOs, we maybe need to look at a risk amount that sits to be accessed for the AO suite?
So I'm going to speak to my office, but I think some of it in the other AOs can speak to their office. Under the accounting standards and under the audit standards, we absolutely need the expertise before we report, and I'm sure they have the same kind of need. And then you can't, it's like Forrest Gump, you open a box of chocolates. You really don't know what's happening until you get into it and which experts you're going to need. We were looking at RGI, and then we realized, you know, we need to look a little deeper to make sure the money's going to where City Council wants it to go.
Just have a little trouble hearing. Little bit of trouble. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. So to make sure the money's going where it needs to, when you open a box, you never know what you're going to find.
Yeah.
So what we find is there's with a bucket, we may have a temporary staff where you get a lot of value from, but you still need to call in the experts as you need them. So we need flexibility, and yes, there are times when you need to pull in more resources than you think you needed. It's hard to predict, but we're pretty stable, and we think we're going to be okay next year based on this. But I do believe that when you need the expert, you need the expert.
Right.
And you need flexibility to get that, for sure.
So structuring your budget the way it is now, I'm maybe putting you on the spot answering this question, but up until now, if you need that and you have to call the city and say, I can't complete this without this, or are you able to tap into resources from the city? Are they responsive to meet the need?
Well, what we do is, you'll see this year that we were returning about 300,000. So what we do is we think, okay, we're going to probably need a certain amount and some flexibility. And if we don't use that piece, it's returned to the city.
Yeah.
Rather than going each time, because it's like today, there's something happening. I would get a call about ransomware. I need a ransomware expert on that now.
Yeah.
And so I don't go over budget. I keep a little bit there, and I'm very cautious to make sure I don't go over budget. And if it was something really big, I think the city would help out. But you need to have that flexibility, because you don't need to be disclosing. You can't disclose your hand all the time as an investigation or an audit where there's a problem. But the city's always been cooperative. I just personally keep a little bit there, and if I have to return 300,000 or something where I didn't use the expert, or that we stretched our times out and I felt comfortable doing that, that was fine. So I do believe these offices need that. It was recognized by Days Hotel when they set up the office to have the flexibility to go back and forth in the budget. I think the city's always been supportive, where if we didn't have the money, we could go there, but that, I think we do need the independence to be able to
Right.
work within our budget.
Okay, okay, thank you. That was a great explanation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Oh, sorry, Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. So with the increase in the budget that's requested, there's no increase in staffing.
Correct.
So what does that additional funding go towards? Is it third-party expertise?
It's catch-up, it's third-party expertise, it's cyber-related. So we use our team to be the base and the knowledge, and then we bring in the experts as we need them, but we manage the project in-house. So it would be people who have some forensic background, for example, to help us to catch up on some of the forensic files and close them down. And then it would be cyber experts and bring them in. But we're managing and driving the project.
Okay. If we don't provide the additional funding requested, is it sort of business as usual? Do we fall further behind?
I don't have a choice. I have to do the cyber. So I'm going to need to take that $675,000 and then drop projects. Like I have Toronto Building, which is in desperate need of a review to make sure that the new CBO is set up for success. So that one will be pushed down. So I'd push parks down. I'd push certain things down. And the other thing is, this is catch-up. It's not something that's going to be ongoing. This is to bridge between the city getting their cyber program really rolling and giving you the independence around critical systems. So that has to be done. I would have to drop off other projects, and that would be a discussion probably with the audit committee, which ones would stay and go and that kind of thing. But
It's been mentioned before, and you mentioned it a couple times in your presentation around the percentage of the city's budget that that your budget represents.
Mm-hmm.
Is that sort of an industry standard for how to measure the budgets of auditor generals?
so, of course, every office is different, and we are trying to look at what other offices are doing across the country and in other countries. And then what we try to do is normalize what each office is doing. Some offices have, so we have an internal audit group in the city, and in police, we take all the internal audit budget, our budget, see what are you dedicating to audit. We compare it to, for example, Chicago, and we'll say, okay, Chicago doesn't have transit in their, something, so we'll take all the programs and try to normalize it. It's something that offices are looking at to use. I can say there's been a number of studies. There's been a KPMG has come in and looked at our office. Other studies have come in and said we're basically lean. I think this is reasonable. So I think it's the right level. It's reasonable. It's 1/20th of 1%. And I look at the value, for example, if the wait list goes down to 1.76, and part of that percent, and that part of that is attributed to identifying the efficiencies to get the vacancies filled and moving people along. If you don't have to build 100 units, that's $33 million. So we think the value's there. The cyber thing has come up across the country. I mean, it's something that we're all dealing with, and it's the new norm. So I think it's a reasonable budget, and I don't think it's too much. Compared to Montreal, Auditor General, even when you add in financial statements, they're much more, they're 0.6%. But they also have 0.05% for the Inspector General in Montreal, which just looks at contracts. And then you have the corruption programs in Quebec. So we cover all of that, and we have the power to cover all of that. I think this is a reasonable budget because there's only so much the city can handle at the same time.
Now, are there sort of industry standards for reporting back and timing of reports, or is that something that? So
there was a national study that was undertaken by the Canadian Audit and Accountability Foundation. And except for the UK, we're the only office that actually quantifies our saving in North America that they can, well, in Canada for sure, out of the 22 offices in Canada. And that was because the committee asked for to demonstrate the value. It's become something that's important now to demonstrate value. For reporting back, Normally, it would take, the Auditor General for Canada said it takes them 18 months to do an audit, and it takes them about 2 or 3 years to follow up. I don't think that's timely enough. You can't, I think, for me, I feel that we try to phase it so you can start working on a piece, one piece of cyber, while we get the next piece going, and then you're ready with the next piece. So we try to chunk it. So does that answer your question, or are you looking for something more
I was more
specific?
wondering if there's an industry standard that we could measure, benchmark ourselves against as to whether we're, whether you're able to achieve what you need to with the budget allotment that you get, or if it's something that needs more stable investment. But it doesn't sound like there is sort of an industry standard, because it sounds like we may be out front of most.
I think we're fighting above our weight in relation to the money that we have and what we're able to deliver. It's because we've stabilized the office. People haven't left in the last 5 years, haven't except to go to other jobs. We've really worked hard with the city, so I think it's reasonable. Now, the challenge is when you have a fraud, I think, and you can't judge what the resources are going to be, and then you have to pull from other areas, and that's part of managing a budget with everybody, and you just try to work with what you have.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the presentation. Next will be the Office of the Integrity Commissioner, and I just want to welcome Jonathan Batty, who is the new Integrity Commissioner, to his first budget. Whenever you're ready.
I'm Jonathan Batty. I was appointed as Integrity Commissioner on November 30th, 2019, and this is my first appearance before Council, or at least a committee of Council, and I would like to thank you for your welcome this morning. I know you are familiar with the work of my office and the role it plays as part of the city's accountability framework. This morning, in the time allotted to me, I would like to explain my office's budgetary recommendations. This year, I am recommending an operating budget of about $763,000. And if we can immediately jump to slide 13. In short, roughly 2/3 of my office's recommended operating budget covers salaries and benefits for its 3 existing positions. That's my position as commissioner, a legal counsel position, and an intake assistant. Most of the remaining third of my office's recommended operating budget is earmarked for purchasing specialized legal and investigative services, very similar to the sorts of expertise that the Auditor General was speaking about before. As you know, the city's budget process this year is comparing a business unit's requested operating budget against what was actually spent by that business unit in the previous year. For the Office of the Integrity Commissioner, it means the proposed 2020 operating budget reflects a year-over-year change of 70.5%, and that's about $315,000. And the reason for this is twofold. First, there was a substantial underspend by the office last year, as the position of legal counsel, which was new, was not filled for several months, and that resulted in an underspend of $125,000 last year. As it has done in the past, my office is requesting funding, this year $200,000, to have the ability to retain external legal and investigative services. This funding has been recommended for several years running, but never approved. I hope this will be the last year my office makes such a request, and I will explain why in a moment. I am very cognizant of the city's budgetary realities, and my recommendations take them into account in 2 ways. First, I am not asking for additional staffing, and I have filled the vacant legal position in my office. Second, I would prefer not to come to council every year with a large budgetary ask for contingent funding to support investigations and legal services. Instead, I believe that budgeting for specialized legal and investigative services is best provided by having a dedicated reserve fund for my office. For this reason, I have included a budgetary recommendation that the city manager and chief financial officer report to council on how to establish such a reserve fund. Establishing such a reserve fund would do three things. First, it would more accurately reflect the occasional need for such additional services. Second, it would allow that funding to be carried over from year to year. And lastly, it would negate the need to have a large request for contingent funding each year. Thank you for your consideration. I am happy to take your questions on my recommendations.
Thank you very much. Questions? Councillor Carroll.
So this is, you're right, it's similar to the question I was asking the AG. So the idea of establishing the reserve fund, you're in an awkward position because you have to ask us first. Independent officers, it's not as if you could have worked this out with staff in advance. We look at your budgets as raw budgets. But has the proposal been fleshed out outside of the just presenting your budget here? Have you had a discussion about the establishment of the reserve, or should we recommend that executive do that?
Well, that's why the recommendation is to have the city manager and the chief financial officer take a look at that, because there are all sorts of things, and I think they're best placed to take a look and also to consult with my office on that, because you can consult on any number of things: the adequate controls, the size, how it's accessed, how it's reported on. It's meant to provide more consistency and predictability. And the challenge is, and I think we have seen this before, where the person in my position has to come every year to ask for this big contingent budget, not knowing, because as the Auditor General has said, I don't have a crystal ball to tell if this is going to be the year of the big investigation.
Right.
So it could be this year, it could be next year, it could be the third year of my mandate. It may never happen in my mandate.
Right, which is why in a smaller unit like yours, you don't want to just leave it floating around in your operating budget. So it would just be scooped back, and then the year would come, you need it.
Right.
In the middle of the year. So Mr. Chair, so the other question is, it's a process question. The recommendation is there that the city manager and the CFO should consider it. That just now follows along to wrap up. Does Budget Committee adopting that recommendation, does that mean, is that a statement to Executive Budget Committee endorses the idea of setting up that reserve and requests a report? And does the money follow with it? Will we be adopting the money at that time? That's the process piece I'm wondering about, because if the report takes a little time to write and comes after the budget is adopted, is the money there to set up the reserve? It's a small amount. Yeah. But I just want to make sure the process gets followed smoothly, because I endorse this idea, and I think by and large it's likely that budget and executive will too.
So maybe the city manager can comment, but the so on with the AOs, their requests are already part of the budget. Where prior we have to prove a budget, they are already embedded in there, so it's up to us to, in essence, if we don't support it, to remove it as we have done in years past. So at this point, it's already part of the recommended budget. So I don't know if the city manager or can comment.
Through the chair, that absolutely accurately reflects where we're at right now. So if you do agree to what is being proposed, then I mean, we can provide whatever supplemental information you want from us that would explain why we think it might make some sense. So, but
yeah. So the report would be there in time that the money ends up in the right place, setting up the reserve.
correct.
Right, okay, okay. Just wanted to make sure of that, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Layton.
Very much. Just on the number of days to complete an investigation. Last year, I'd note that there were the actuals for 2018. Sorry, I think this number is 2019. So the 279 number. Is that days to complete an investigation?
That's the median number of days.
The median number of
Yes.
days. And what should that be? Is it 180?
My preference would be for it to be 180.
And what are we going to do to get the 279 to the 180? Is the additional funding in this budget enough to help you achieve that?
Yes.
It is?
And this is my appraisal of the situation. 279 has been a median, and that's the median. We have had matters which have taken 700 days to complete, and in saying that, I emphasize that is no adverse comment against my predecessor. It's a reality of the resources devoted for this office, because the challenge we face is not a volume of complaints. The challenge we face is concurrent complaints, because we are so small. And I am not proposing that we build a massive team. But there are instances where, in order to address something in a timely way, ideally within the 180 days, I need to be able to bring in additional bodies either to assist with investigations or provide legal advice on matters, because we don't have enough resources in those extraordinary circumstances to cover the field. And that's why I think it more prudent to establish this reserve fund to address things like that, rather than, and I'm not happy that I'm facing a world where in my mandate, my investigation can be 300 days long, but there are practical realities that I have to face. And in this, and what's different from my predecessor's time is there are some very stringent times in place under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act for me to now perform and complete my work. So you had asked previously about, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, about industry standards. I now have a statutory standard where I should be completing my work within 180 days.
What happens if you don't? Is there a consequence from the MC, the MIC, not the MICO? Is there a legislative consequence to not complete?
There is a consequence.
CIA.
And what the consequence is that the person who has come to me has no check on their ability to then take the application to court.
Okay.
So they can go right away. So this is like, my submission to council would be, they want me to complete those matters within 180 days, because those matters can land a couple of different ways. I make an application, or I see that there is no basis to proceed with an application. And that's important. Whereas if it just times out, the court who would be reviewing this has no benefit of that finding or recommendation from the Integrity Commissioner.
So from where we're sitting, if a complaint is brought against us as individuals, and you're unable to investigate within the 180 days, the individual bringing the complaint against us would be able to take us, the city, individuals, to court
Right.
as a result.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Next is the Office of the Lobbyist Registrar. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the committee, and good morning to our Chief Financial Officer and to our colleagues here this morning. In the interest of saving time and allowing for my colleague, the Ombudsman, to have enough time for her presentation, I'm going to focus this morning strictly on pages 9 and 11 of the slides that you have, but certainly I'm willing to entertain any questions that you may have in order to fully explain what we're asking. In short, the ask that my office is making this year is for 2 staff positions. And what I'm showing you on slide 9 is a bit of our success story so you can better understand why we believe these 2 positions are our best recommendation for how we can approach continuing our success over the next 10 years. So if you look at the lobbying communications reported at year end, comparing the years 2011 and 2019, you'll see when the model was first launched in 2011, you had somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 and some lobbying communications that were being reported annually. And thanks to the work of everyone in this room, all the public office holders of the City of Toronto, including all council members, their staff, and all city staff, this model has been embraced. It's your success. 10 years later, through teaching, coaching, directing lobbyists who are communicating with all of you to do the right thing, to be transparent, and to interact with you the way the city has enumerated its standards for such communications. We now have a model that is reporting basically on an annual basis in and around 6,000 a year. The year that just ended had 7,200 lobbying communications reported. That is a championship accomplishment for any government to be able to have a vision for transparency and make it happen. Behind this work is the dedicated work of 2 investigative staff who are providing legal advice, applying facts to law, amending legislation, working to make your model better. You've got 3 registry advisors who are on the front line, giving advice to all of you, giving advice to lobbyists. And the net result is you've moved from, if you look at the charts on the other side, on page 1, you've got in 2011, when you first started your model, you see where the number of transactions that were required to be processed in order to give you the reports you need has increased by about 400% to about somewhere around 12,000 transactions at the end of 2019 in order to produce the work that gives us the transparency that we want. The challenge for our office is that our staff complement has not changed since 2011. And hence, we want to let you understand that the value that our office brings you and what the model that you've all upheld is that when you go to the registry and you see those communications, you are giving the public evidence of your trustworthiness and evidence that your decision-making process is open for everyone to understand who is influencing that. And so if we look at what we need for the next decade, your vision for improving transparency is something that you've been gracious about and have continued to commit to. You committed to a new registry system for our office, which we're hoping to launch next year. You've committed to a new case management system, which we're hoping to launch in the spring. You've committed to enabling our office to implement a new administrative monetary penalty system when it comes to the City of Toronto and is in fact enacted, will be the first administrative monetary penalty system at the municipal level in Canada. And so these legislative changes, these systemic improvements, validate your commitment to what our office does and the transparency you want to deliver. However, the net result of the growth is that the more immediate demands of advanced breach prevention and attending to all this legislative and technological change has absorbed the time available to conduct inquiries, and unfortunately, it's lengthening the time required to conduct them. So in order to handle the volume and to be able to deliver timely service, we would benefit from an additional registry and outreach advisor. And in order to ensure that our office is able to be effective in terms of deterrence, because our compliance arm through our investigative unit is effective, our office has requested a junior counsel position. So that is basically the request that's before you, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you. Councillor Layton. No? Oh, okay. I just thought. Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate the.
Thank you.
Last but not least is the Ombudsman. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Good morning to the members of the committee. My name is Susan Opler, and I'm the Ombudsman. Beside me is Grace Young, and Grace is with the City Clerk's Department and supports 3 of the 4 accountability offices in our budget, planning, forecasting, and reporting. So I just want to thank her very much for all her help. Ombudsman Toronto is a tiny office with a very big, broad, and I would submit important mandate. The essence of my budget recommendation today is this. In order to keep up with the increased demand on our services, we need funds for 2 new full-time staff positions. 1 complaints analyst, which is what we call the people who do intake with the public, and 1 investigator. Like my colleagues, I have presented a full deck of slides, but I will skip through some of them quite quickly to get to the crux of the matter. The committee, the public, and the staff, I hope, all know what my office does. We call ourselves the public's bridge to fairness. We oversee the administration of the city and how it serves people. And our vast jurisdiction includes responding to complaints and investigating concerns about unfairness and maladministration in all 45 city divisions, plus Toronto Community Housing, plus the TTC, Toronto Hydro, all adjudicative boards, among others. And we do this, of course, on behalf of City Council. Most of what we do is respond, next slide, sorry. Most of what we do is we respond to the public's complaints by investigating and trying to resolve problems that have arisen in their dealings with city administration. We also do systemic investigations and consultations. And within each case, the work of my team shows city staff and the public what fair service requires and what it looks like. Our work results in 3 broad categories of outcomes. The public's complaints are independently and fairly addressed. City systems for serving people are improved, and they work better for the people that they're designed to serve. And city staff treats people in a way that is fair. Here on this slide is the crux of our budgetary problem. The volume of complaints we're dealing with has increased by 41% over the last 3 years. But our staff complement of 12 full-time staff, and that includes me as the Ombudsman, has been static since 2015. Simply put, we're not able to keep up with the demand on our services. In 2019, one of the results of this was that we had to reduce our service levels in terms of how quickly we are able to get back to people because we simply weren't able to meet them, and we didn't think it was fair to promise people that we would call them back or respond to their communications within a certain length of time and not be able to do that. Cases are taking longer to get completed. We keep stats on that, and the average or the duration of cases generally is going up. And really importantly, we are finding ourselves without the necessary resources to undertake important systemic investigations and to do proactive consultations with city staff to help them serve people better and avoid complaints in the first place. This slide shows what we need to be able to do to fulfill our mandate, and in order to do it effectively and in a way that I feel the mandate requires, we simply put need more staff. This slide, I won't go over it in detail, but this slide shows the amazing work that our very small team did in 2019 alone. And these are just a few of the many positive changes that resulted from the work of the team at Ombudsman Toronto. Ombudsman Toronto's budget is a tiny sliver of the overall city budget. It's 0.015%. And this slide shows how the amount that Toronto spends on its ombudsman per resident compares to other Canadian jurisdictions with an ombudsman. You'll see we are a very lean operation. The next slide I'll go to just shows quickly the history of our budget requests since I began my term as ombudsman. And as you'll see, last year I made exactly the same request that I'm making this year. The need has only increased and become more urgent. Last year, Council passed a motion suggesting that Toronto City Council, that Toronto Community Housing Corporation should fund this need because we do a lot of work overseeing that organization. You have before you a budget note from the City Manager's Office explaining quite correctly in my submission that it's not appropriate for Toronto Community Housing to be funding the work of an independent office. It impinges on the independence of the office. It suggests that Council is directing how the money should be spent. But there's no question I would submit that this need exists. It's only gotten greater, and I'm back with the same request that I was here last year. As a result, sorry, just going back for a moment, as a result of the investigations and consideration by the City Manager's Office, we did not get the requested and voted on enhancement last year. So this is the bottom line. The recommended operating budget is just over $2 million. Over 90% of our budget goes to our staff. And the increase that I'm looking for is highlighted there. Instead of 12 full-time positions, I'm looking for 14 with the additional intake person and investigator. Going to slide 18. This is how much it will cost to give my office the 2 much-needed staff positions to help us fulfill our mandate. For 2020, it's $170,000. So with that, I am happy to entertain any questions from members of the committee. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Layton.
So I couldn't find it. I was trying to bring it up really quickly about the backlog or the gap in the service level right now with your office with respect to responding to complaints. Do you think that the 2 positions will substantially allow you to close that gap?
The service levels I was referring to are how quickly we will respond to people's phone calls and written communications. And I actually do think that we will be able to go back to our prior service levels. It's a matter of days, but when a member of the public has a complaint, it may be a very urgent matter. We don't know until we've spoken to them or evaluated what they've sent to us. And so a matter of days can make a huge difference for people. We used to pledge to get back to people by phone in 1 day and in writing in 2 business days, and we've had to extend those because we just couldn't do it. But I do believe it would help significantly, if not close that gap, to have these 2 additional staff.
What are they extended to now? What's your typical?
I believe right now it's at 2 days and 5 days, respectively, for phone and written communication.
And that's just acknowledging that you've received their complaint?
Exactly. Acknowledging and responding to anything urgent that has been raised in the communication.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, oh, no, I think everybody's good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, next we will go on to the Infrastructure and Development Services Group, and we will be having a presentation on that section. Welcome, Tracy, DCM Tracy Cook,
Alrighty.
who will lead and guide us through the presentation, along with the questions.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be the starter for Infrastructure and Development Services. I have a deal, if I can do this in 9.5 minutes or less, the fire chief is buying lunch for me, so there's a motivation for us to get through the presentation today and really on to the detailed conversation and the answer to the questions that I know you all have. So first, I'd like to say I'm joined by Annalisa Mignardi, my Executive Director of Policy Planning, Finance and Admin, our centralized support in IDS. And a quick thank you to our CFO for taking us through a new approach to the budget, the modernization journey that we're on. Thank you to her team and our team for everything they've done to prepare the budget and for the presentation today. And all the program leads, the division heads that have really embraced the new approach to how we talk about the work that we do, the services we provide, and the outcomes we're seeking to achieve. So IDS itself is comprised of about 12 program areas. This includes solid waste and Toronto Water. Of course, you've already spoken with them as you approve the rate budget, but I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge their role in partnership with all of the services that the entire group does and that the city provides. It also includes a new office set up in 2019, which is the Transit Expansion Office. Instead of going through everything that it is that we do, we took an effort at trying to really roll up what all of the different program areas do, how they contribute together to deliver a city that we all want, and deliver the outcomes that we're all seeking to achieve. And in so doing, I look at what we provide and we plan, we review, we enable, be it developments or roads. We partner, build, and maintain infrastructure and communities. We inspect and enforce to make sure quality standards are maintained. And really, we engage, respond, and serve the public in various ways, including those related to life safety. So the real magic, I believe, in this group is when all of these come together and focus on these particular groups. And we've chosen an approach talking about safe and resilient neighborhoods and all the work that we do that feeds into the delivery of that for our communities. The effort that goes into mobility and how people move and goods move around the city and all the efforts that go into accommodating and enabling that, managing the assets and investing in the assets that we have to meet the growing needs of the city and the region, really, and what we do for our staff and how we enable our leaders and our staff to deliver on the services and achieve the outcomes we terribly need. In that respect, we meet and we contribute to all of the corporate priorities that have been set out in the strategic plan in no particular order, but certainly across the entire spectrum. When we talk about some of the issues that we face, they're not new, they're not unique to us, but I think they're absolutely worth discussing in the context of the services that we deliver. Certainly, and our city manager and I had a conversation this morning, and the comment he made was the pace of growth in Toronto is breathtaking. And I thought, well, that's a fantastic way to articulate what it is that we are facing with a growing and changing city. The demands on our infrastructure, the demands on our roads, the increasing verticality of the city and how that impacts our fire services. So these are all the issues and risks that we have and the things we need to address. As well as the behavior change that we need our public to join with us with. We can make all the efforts possible to change the way roads operate, change speeds, get people to pay attention to fire prevention, but we need that partnership with the community, otherwise we'll never achieve the outcomes that we are seeking to do. I've already talked about the infrastructure and our ability and need to make sure we have integrated systems, that our assets are maintaining their structural integrity and their usability for the users of the road. And of course, we have tens of billions of dollars in assets that we are responsible for, and they all, as we are aging. So how we respond to that, and really the continuous march of technology and the expectations our public has and our ability to deliver services, deliver the results that they want to see, and their ability to access us on demand. So, you know, facing that technology march is also another one of those things that we need to address. So as we look at some of the actions and where we're focusing, and a lot of the conversation we have is around thinking generationally. And, you know, I look at these things and I think, I don't want my grandchildren, of which there are 6, to inherit the cost of the decisions we take today and the decisions and actions that we take today. They will be the recipients of what we do with our money and how we invest our time and effort. So in so doing, ensuring that we have policies, processes that are modernized, continue to plan for growth, that we leverage the information we have available to deliver. And I think one of the very important things we're focused on is building out more partnerships. Partnerships to deliver infrastructure, partnerships to deliver programs, and partnerships with the community to better their living conditions. So as we go into what the budgets represent, at a very high level, IDS, we're approximately $3 billion, inclusive of the rate program. The tax-based portion that we're talking about today is about $1.2 billion. From the property tax, you'll see that we take approximately 60.5%, or 60.5% of our budget is attributed to the property tax. The balance is covered through revenues that come in through various sources, user fees, license and permits, et cetera. In addition to this, in this year's budget, we've talked about new and enhanced asks focused under the safety and security and other city priorities. These speak to investments in transportation with the expansion of the red light camera program, fire, and what I know our Chief Peg will be happy to discuss and what he's doing with staffing. In the other, as far as city planning and their advancement of efficiencies and organization on the development review side, as well as heritage studies, and Toronto Building continuing their digital strategy on a record centralization program. In total, this represents an investment of an incremental 28 FTE. On the capital side, their 10-year capital recast, you'll see in front of you, is approximately $5.5 billion. This is, and 75% of which is attributed to state of good repair. The 10-year plan was informed by a significant body of work undertaken by staff. And what we did, and what staff did, was looked at the past 5 years of our achievability. What have we been able to deliver? What have we been able to achieve? And on the other side, what is the state of those projects that we have planned as far as their state of readiness to deliver? I think it's very important to note that you'll see in 2019 where we're projecting to end. And I think this is an example of the enormous work done in the divisions to deliver, be it transportation and ECS notably. Our chief engineer speaks about the scale and nature of the projects that we are delivering in this city as far as civil infrastructure, which is unprecedented. So when you look at the scale, scope, and complexity of the work that this group is delivering, it's incredible. And we are targeting an over 80% completion rate across all of those projects. That has very much informed our approach, and as I said, looking at where the projects are in their life cycle and budgeting appropriately, accordingly, and achievably. One of the things we did discover, and as our chief engineer led this in partnership with Toronto Water, was the use of a multi-year procurement approach. It was used in the water infrastructure, and I know Michael is looking at engaging that type of an approach now that we have this opportunity on our local road resurfacing program in 2020. So we'll definitely start to benefit and advance projects while we have these new tools to use. So projects that are in the plan, you can see at a very high level, nice pictures, sorry. I know a lot of discussion about the Gardner at the extent of money being invested there. The one thing that I think gets lost in the conversation sometimes is that is the entire length of the Gardner, from the 427 to the Don Valley Parkway, 18 kilometers of roadway, of highway, 7 kilometers elevated, 11 kilometers at grade. So it is an investment in a significant asset that we own that helps move the city. The state of good repair, this gives you the picture inclusive of the gardener, but I think when we take the gardener out, you'll see where we are looking at the end of this 10-year plan. It's 9.5 and I've lost lunch. I think the important message to look at here is that we do have significant value of asset. We do have assets that need attention. But at the same time, we've got plans underway, and I know Barbara and the transportation group, and I don't want to steal her thunder, but are certainly taking this a very, very strategic lens on what we are doing in respect to our road infrastructure. They've undertaken road condition assessments and continue to do so, so we have a better picture out of our state of good repair, as does Michael with our bridges. You know, it's to acknowledge the extent of the investments that we need to make and the critical reason why we need to be strategic in how we spend our money, because our state of good repair overall across the city, across all asset classes, is quite the thing, and certainly will benefit from the work that our CFO is leading on the plan on capital asset management, and we are going to mature those processes. In respect to, particularly on the roads, I know transportation is working on a road asset plan strategy to tie into the broader capital plan, asset management plan for 2021. The constraints speak to some of those things that have been identified in the state of good repair backlog, and also other future needs from a capital perspective that are not currently residing in the 10-year plan. So very high level. I think I'll just leave you with a thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to front end the discussion that we're having. In 10 minutes is extremely difficult, or 9.5, extremely difficult to articulate the contributions, the efforts, the achievements, and everything that all the service areas in all the divisions in this service area provide. And I certainly have not done it justice, but I hope it gives you a sense of the amount that which this group contributes to the city. So thank you, and the team is ready.
Thank you very much, Tracy, and of course, thank you to the team who have brought this forward. I'll open it up for questions.
Am I the only one that's going to be asking questions about this division? No, come on, Bradford, you've got... are we going to do them in order? I have questions of at least 3 of the divisions.
We could. We have in years past done both. We've gone individually. We've done groups. So we could.
It's going to take a little bit of time for me to get through the questions. So
yeah, I mean, we can either do a number of. So why don't we go through? Let's try going down through individual ones, and so that maybe speed things up actually. Yeah. So why don't we look at city planning?
Sure. So to our chief planner, the development review process on page 2 says that the completion within 30 days is down from 78 to 72. What effect does it have on the city and city staff when we're unable to complete development reviews within 30 days?
Through the chair, that metric reflects our initial notice that is sent to applicants, so it's only one small part of the development review process. To answer your question directly, whether our objective overall is to achieve the best outcome we can with a development review, something that implements the official plan of the city. The decision to approve or not approve that development. Our service level is around 9 to 18 months, but that is being reviewed in the context of our end-to-end review. When we last looked at our performance on that, a number of applications over a number of years, we were in the order of 18 months. When you look at the dynamic that happens with a typical development review project, about 9 months on the applicant side, about 9 months on the city side when we last did a deep dive on files. We want to look at a more built-in metric for our new end-to-end review process that will give us a better kind of ongoing read of that. In relation to, though, the ultimate pressure that it puts on us, We obviously want to make effective and efficient decisions. The city needs to do both. We have a time clock on us with provincial legislation, and that time clock has gotten tighter with the new Bill 108. So everything and anything that we can do to make both efficient and effective decisions, we're quite mindful of.
So our average on development applications, rezonings is 180?
80, our average, when we last looked at the data, and again, it's not a reflection of exact 2019 data because we don't have a fully functioning system on these metrics, but when we last looked at it, we did an assessment of, I believe it was 700 files, and came in at an average of 18 months for the official plan and zoning part of the decision.
And what is the new standard that Bill 108 put on, or the new requirement that Bill 108 put on those applications?
So previously, we, depending on whether or not a rezoning was, I believe, 120 days, and an official plan amendment was 180 days, and the new provincial legislation has asked us to produce a decision in 90 days, which I have stated publicly and previously that is impossible to do, because simply fulfilling our legislative requirements and giving notice for having an application come in, reviewing it, having a community meeting, doing the review, engaging with the applicant, engaging with the community, and giving notice of a decision would put you well past 90 days, even if you were performing your very, very best.
I'd argue that booking in a councilor's schedule, you need to
That is certainly
several months
one
out.
of many considerations when we try to move efficiently and effectively, yes.
The heritage requirements are even more strict, correct? The changes that have come into effect?
So under Bill 108, there's a new, which has not been fully implemented by regulation yet, but a new requirement that creates a new application type, if you will, which would have us making a determination on the heritage resource. I believe it's within 90 days of receipt of an application. So coincident with the decision that council would need to make on the whole matter. That is one of the reasons why we've included resource ask, because we have a legislative imperative now to be able to provide council with that information as to whether or not it chooses to designate or not a property. And that obviously goes to our point of view on the overall application, if we know we're working with a heritage resource or not, or how that heritage resource might need to be modified in order for us to recommend an application.
So just really quickly, because I'm running out of time, we added heritage planners in a mid-year adjustment last year, is that true?
To mid-year adjustment last year, yes.
Yeah, thanks. Now, I have a note here that there was a $100,000 cut from the Heritage Conservation District program between 2019 and 2020. Is that going to impact our ability to achieve our HCD goals?
No, the recast of the capital is based on our capacity to spend that. We have coincidentally a work program report on Planning and Housing Committee next week, and it has an updated list of our achievements in 2019 and our projected achievements in 2020. And there are a number of HCDs that are listed in that report that are identified for completion in 2020. So we're continuing with our HCD program. We're just recasting the spend to better reflect our ability to spend.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Nunziata.
So the answer to Councillor Lane's question, so it takes approximately 9 to 18 months to process a rezoning application?
Yes, again, when we last surveyed a grouping of applications, and again, I stated that this was not 2019 numbers, but a survey of applications that we did a deep dive on. So because we wanted to assess how much total time, but also how much time was being spent with us versus how much time gets spent with an applicant. Because as you know, when plans are submitted, the city reviews them, then gives comments back to applicants. We reflect the comments of the community, work with communities to effect changes to put us in a position to either recommend approval of an application or refusal.
But on the other hand, I thought at one time we talked about that when an application, rezoning application comes in, what would help not only the planning staff as well as the applicant, that we have, that we get all the divisions in one room and we talk about the staff tells the applicant what they need and you know, as far as, you know, bringing their information forward. And that would save time as well, and that would expedite the process. We did that. You know, if we did that, would we not be able to expedite these applications? And if we work with the applicant and, you know, at the first step, rather than wait 9 months later and then the applicant is, you know, working with the applicant on getting the right information. I mean, that was an issue a few years ago, Greg, and I thought that we were looking towards that on improving the process.
So through the chair, certainly we're not waiting for 9 months. It's more of a table tennis metaphor where we're sending it back and forth. But I agree with the overall direction of your question, Councillor, because very much our best practice is when we are able to get everybody together around a table and sort out what the city comments are and work with the applicant. And we do often apply that technique. However, when we reviewed our development review system and reported out last year on it, what so-called end-to-end review, we did concur that we could improve the way we do and work the system overall, and it very much reflects what you just described in your question, and that is the direction that we're headed toward. Again, we do that practice. My view is we don't do it enough or systematically, and that's the effort of the end-to-end review.
So, okay, but why don't we do it enough then?
I believe
Like what's
I believe there are a
reason
number
for
of
that?
factors. It's the way that we're organized, our operating model, and this, again, was the conclusion in the deep dive that was done with the end-to-end review, is that our operating model isn't necessarily structured to enable that to function. We are a very large municipality. We have distributed staff. We have technology challenges. Our technology dates back probably 20 years in terms of the systems that we're using. Our project management skill set could be better improved, and again, that was openly acknowledged in the end-to-end review, both by staff and by applicants. Things do get stuck. That was another issue that was identified, again, by staff and by applicants. The quality of submissions was an issue. These were all factors that were included in the end-to-end review, and is very much driving the intent of the change that we want to implement, that we are implementing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Bradford? Okay.
Thanks very much through the chair. Do we want to do like all the city planning ones and then
Yeah, let's just see
MLS?
how, yeah, that may save a bit of time if, because we'll have to do repeated questioning, so let's
Yeah.
try that to see how it goes.
So I've got transportation, MLS.
So why don't we just focus on planning now, and then we'll.
Okay, very quickly then, through the chair to the chief planner. Yesterday, we heard from legal services that despite what the province perhaps intended with Bill 108, applications are now more complicated based on those legislative changes. And this budget outlines additional staffing to handle the applications. How has Bill 108 impacted the appeal process for city planning?
Through the chair, I would say, and we were interestingly talking about this morning, looking at our, our appeal record, and it did take a bit of a dip in 2018 and 2019, and we theorize that that is because the rules have gone through at least 2 or maybe 2.5 complete resets, and applicants as well as the city are waiting for the rules to play out completely. They have not been fully implemented through the regulations that come with the bills, but it is essentially not. Sorry, but to put my answer more generally, it has essentially put us back to the system that preceded the former government's legislation, which is, in addition to the time constraint that the Councillor Layton noted, we're back to the system that we have had for 10, 15, or 20 years with the OMB dealing with de novo matters the way that many of you are used to. It was changed with the previous government, but has been changed back. And I would say we're simply expecting to, in many respects, go back to the way we used to do business with the added time pressure that has been put on us.
Just want to unpack a little bit your answer to Councillor Layton with respect to the legislated time requirements in which we must respond to applications. With respect to the C of A timeframe, where the report notes a decrease in wait times for Committee of Adjustment applications, which is great. Do we anticipate that to change as a result of Bill 108 with respect to C of A or development applications?
With respect to Committee of Adjustment, I don't believe so. We've implemented a number of operational improvements. Our South District performance, because of its volume, always lags behind, but the other three Committee of Adjustments are performing quite well and pretty close to the bone when it comes to the service that standard that the legislation sets out. We can't get much better, but we're not seeing an uptick on appeals or some sort of other pressure. We generally get about 10% of our applications, in and around 4,000 applications a year, just under that, and we usually run at about a 10% appeal rate, and that has not significantly changed, maybe dipped a little bit. Some of that has been as a result of cleaning up our zoning bylaw as well, which makes things clear for people who want to propose changes.
I don't know if you would know this breakdown, but of that the 10% appeal rate, how many of those appeals are triggered based on timeline, the 90-day review period, versus other reasons like you mentioned, zoning bylaw appeal? What's that ratio look like?
I would say very few. It's more about a difference of opinion as to whether or not the committee approved or refused, and whether or not the applicant liked that decision. I think that's the majority of the driver for the C of A appeals. The other appeals that we get for community planning applications, I do not have a statistic breaking out appeals based on time versus appeals based on differences of opinion, but my opinion would be that we do not get very many based on time. We have applicants and we certainly encourage applicants to work with the city and work with communities to find resolutions, whether they're appealed or not. And I would say if we get to the OMB for an adjudicated matter, it ends up being an extensive hearing based on, the merits of the proposal.
So they're not jumping into appeal just because that 90-day period passes?
I don't have any data that suggests that's the case.
Okay, thanks. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Got the questions? Councillor Perks?
Thank you. So my understanding was that the reforms brought in not by this government but by the previous one, the LPAT reforms, would have narrowed the grounds for appeal and therefore resulted in fewer appeals.
That was the intent of the legislation, and we admittedly had maybe 9 months of that world before it was changed back, so it was hard to reach any database conclusion on that, but certainly that was everyone's understanding of the direction.
Right. So by going back to the system that has de novo and all of those wonderful, exciting ways for developers to take us to hearings, given that we can't put the cost of preparing and attending a hearing onto development fees, is there any adjustment in application fees? Is there any adjustment in this budget towards anticipating a higher volume of appeals that we have to pay for out of general revenue?
Through the chair, so our fee review was last undertaken in 2016, okay. And what is in the budget is an inflation factor. We intend to, we had intended to do a fee review, a normal pace of every 2 to 3, 4 years.
It's not-
We delayed it a bit, only because of the end-to-end review. And what we will do, once we look at the process coming out of the end-to-end review, is look at the whole, literally end-to-end process, including the OMB component, and reflect that in the fee as we review
But we
it
can't
in
put
2020.
hearings into fees. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Right? You can't charge an applicant the cost of preparing and attending preparing for and attending a hearing in their fee. You can't use that money for that purpose. Am I correct?
I believe not. We do, when we did the last fee review, the development review or the development fee includes a legal component. I believe it's around 7%, which would cover the normal cost of legal services associated with an application. But I believe you are correct that it doesn't extend into the OMB world.
Yeah, that's correct. So given that, and given that the volume of hearings is likely to increase, is there any adjustment in this budget because that has to be paid for out of general revenues and can't be paid for out of fees?
There is not yet. We have not witnessed a bump, and we'll monitor that closely and have to assess that as we go.
Okay. The other thing that I was curious about, with the various housing initiatives that have come forward, many of them include waiving development review fees. How have you budgeted for that?
The previous decisions of council to take a policy position to waive fees for affordable have been taken into account by us absorbing that work. It is not identified as a separate item.
So you're absorbing it rather than budgeting for it. What do you project in a busy year or a typical year going forward, the cost to your department will be of doing it that way?
To be honest, I have not made that calculation. I think if you looked at the hopeful, like at a number of units per year, let's say 1,000 affordable housing units times a fee, we could do that calculation and get a measure of the budget impact. But I would have to think and do a little bit more work on that.
I would very much appreciate that. I'd like to know how we're paying for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we'll go to MLS, Municipal Licensing and Standards, for questions. Council, we'll start with, why don't we go with outside, we'll get back to process and do outside councilors, so we'll do Councillor Perks first. We'll do Councillor Perks first, and then we'll go to committee. Mind you, in years past, we have actually done the opposite, but I'm just going to try consistency, and let's do Councillor Perks. Okay. So, Councillor, we're coming to Councillor Layton, then Carol.
Thank you very much. It's kind of all over the place here, but why do you expect to receive 4,000 less licensing and permit renewals compared to the previous 2 years?
I presume you're seeing that on in the notes?
Yeah, I don't have the page number here, but the notes anticipate, I think it's here on page 2 in the goals and metrics, that we're actually expecting to see a 4,000, which is like roughly a 10% reduction, maybe a 7% reduction in the number of licensing and permit issuance and renewals. I'm just wondering why we expect to see such a drop off.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm seeing that number like in a different light right now because you think they may be going up. But this involves a number of things from pet licensing to noise exemptions to patio permits, which in all cases should actually be climbing rather than reducing. So in fact, I'd like to take a look at this and potentially reevaluate that, because 4,000 drop doesn't seem appropriate when we actually have other lines of business coming on as well. Short-term rentals, for example.
I was about to ask a question about short-term rentals. Does the budget account for the influx of work your department will get as a result of short-term rentals in the coming budget?
When the report was brought forward to council at the end of 2017, we included a number of positions, including enforcement and administration. The appeal has taken 2 years, and now we are coming upon it quickly this year to be in place. We are also going to be looking at this differently from an enforcement perspective. The party houses and the things that are in the media a lot will be done within our existing staff, and we are moving towards a more compliance audit-based, data-driven model, which we have staff on that side who will be working, looking at that.
I think you just made it onto my list of briefing note requests, just with that one. Sorry to let. So on page 10, you have these performance measures. These obviously aren't all of your performance measures, but the ones that are here actually, sorry, I'm going to bring up page 10 here, show a decrease in the. So first off, the percentage of 5-day responses to non-emergency. It shows a decrease compared to 2016, 17, and 18, down as much as 11% from 2018. The next one, we're seeing the same thing, the percentage of license issuances within 20 days. I'm just wondering what's contributing to the decrease in the performance measures?
So I'll start with the first one. A lot of it is in past we've had, in this year particular, we had a number of vacancies in the enforcement area. Vacancies in our world attribute directly to our service responses. The good news is that we have hired 2 tranches of bylaw officers, a class of 37 and a class of 14, for a total of 51. The first time ever we've introduced 2 classes in 1 year, and we are filling those vacancies, and we expect to see a turn in our performance. The other issue is really the complexity of the work that our staff are dealing with. A lot of our stuff is not transactional, and it does take longer to do than the 5 days. And as we've heard from the first 3 presentations, with investigations and response times, it is important that we acknowledge the receipt of it, but the investigation itself can take a lengthy time.
So in past years, you've had, if I remember correctly, you've listed more performance measures. I'm just wondering, is that information available anywhere? The length of time it takes to respond to a noise complaint, to getting a complaint about off-leash dogs. I distinctly remember seeing performance measures at least listed in another document for MLS. I'm wondering if there's somewhere else that I could look for this information.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe in the approach to the notes this year, we've taken those granular measures out. I do believe that corporately there's been a rolled up report that presents service levels, so they may be getting captured there. That's why you're not seeing them in these notes.
Have we been provided, we got the user fee report yesterday.
Through the chair, when we launched the budget on Friday, we also made available a report, which is a consolidation of all of the service levels by all program and agency. And that's available as part of the documents that would have been provided.
So where do I find it? Because I don't see it on the .ca/budget in any of those sections. Is there?
Through the chair, I'll confirm exactly where it's located and ensure that we have that available.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, I'm concerned about this short-term rental news that we're just going to handle this growing issue with existing staff. Can we look at historically, for instance, once we got through figuring out our Uber pieces, did that require additional staff? Once we did the adjustment between taxi reform and licensing Uber, did that take additional staff?
Yes, as we've introduced new programs since basically 2016, we've incrementally added positions to deal with it. The short-term rentals did have 5 positions included in that. It included 3 MSOs and an administrative person and a compliance piece. We don't know the nature of the volume of complaints And for us to be prudent, we needed to have a 6 to 12 months understanding of what's actually happening. We think the bulk of the work will be in the first year as this comes on to play. And as people know the rules, they'll be able to understand and follow those rules, and we can move towards more of a data-driven compliance audit with our own team and third-party auditors that we will bring in.
So a compliance audit means attending someone who legitimately identifies themselves as a host and making sure they're in compliance? That's not a complaint, I think I've got a hotel next door and it's not going well. Is that a different thing than a compliance audit?
Yes, so someone's running a hotel in your area, that's definitely a call through on one. We will go investigate. We do these address by address, but these complaints are, again, large number now, but we see them declining once people are understanding of the rules. The second piece of the compliance is if we have 20,000 people register with us, we would do data skimming, data scanning, data audits to understand and randomly understand if Councillor Carroll, as a register, is in your principal residence and you are following the rules.
Okay, and does that, I hunted around for it, maybe it's a bit previous, within the notes, I couldn't find whether or not you're resourcing yourself and whether or not you're properly projecting revenues that might come in to resource yourself for the confluence of issues that all hit homes, which is the short-term rentals, the vacancy issue, people leaving giant faux chateaus empty, and we have to enforce that somehow. And then lastly, the issue that we're going to tackle this year, rooming houses, both updating the rules, then finding a way to apply those in the suburbs and partnering with the action around zoning, how that takes place in the suburbs. Are there the resources in here for you to, first of all, take part in that exercise? And should the council adopt something in year, are you ready to roll, or whatever decision is taken there would be applied to the 2021 budget? The rooming house piece.
So great question. I'll start with the broader perspective of, in 2011 and 2012, we deleted 15 kind of enforcement positions, and they've been brought back incrementally over the last number of years. So we have 60 more positions in our division than we did in 2016. So we have increased positions, and we have hired. From the rooming house perspective, that is something that it would either be in year or in 2021 as we go through the process to determine it. Once it has to be approved by committee and council. So that's important and prudent upon us not to put resources in if the work isn't there. But we do see a significant amount of work with illegal rooming houses and bringing people transitioning to legal. There would be a lot of work, and we see it kind of comparable to our Rent Safe program that has a number of officers and a number of shifts and a number of supervisors to deal with the quality, to ensure that the quality of housing is there and the volume of work that we expect.
Okay, so a lot will not happen until 2021, but you feel confident that I can be confident saying in 2020, while we're doing this deliberation over suburban rooming house and how we solve that issue, while we're doing this, robust enforcement of all the illegal ones is still going on. You feel comfortable with that statement? You don't sound.
No, I don't know.
It was too long a pause. That doesn't.
No.
Sound comfortable.
I would feel most comfortable, and it's an exercise that we need to do as a division, and is a prioritization exercise. And what's happening right now is we are doing 30 things equally. We're nibbling at them.
Yeah.
If we want to make significant movement with our service standards and with the impact we're having on our community, we need priorities that are acceptable to the public, that are acceptable to us, that are acceptable, that we can deliver. When we do have priorities, as we've introduced through the new noise team and we have introduced through our animal services team, we have seen success. Where we do not have priorities and we're chasing our tail and we're doing 100 things, we do not see the same success.
Okay, I'm going to maybe make a briefing note, because I've been trying to make this one a priority since 2006. So I just need friends to agree with me. I'm going to ask for some notes around it.
Councillor Bradford.
Okay.
Thanks very much, through the chair. Councillor Layton asked a lot of the questions I was interested in, but on page 3, we note in the key challenges that we're having, more conflict between wildlife and humans within communities. Residents in Topham Park have experienced a large influx with coyote encounters this year. And I was just wondering if that's been the case across the city of Toronto, if we're seeing coyote sightings up this year.
I believe the short answer is yes. I think what's really important to note here is, and it was mentioned in Tracy's presentation about about growth, and the growth of the number of people in our city, the number of new developments, and the reduction in habitat for wildlife. And so as a result, there is greater conflict, wildlife to person. There are more people in our city, which means there are more domestic animals. We continue to increase the number of animals and wildlife in our city, and coyote sightings are becoming more prevalent. We are doing a lot of work related to public education. People are feeding coyotes, and that is why we have coyotes, along with the habitat issue. So the combination of both, so we need to educate and we need to know that we can coexist with wildlife.
Okay, thanks. On page 3 and 4, it's noted that we have challenges with enforcement. I think that's probably consistent across the MLS portfolio. But as my colleagues were talking about, our ability, a key priority action to actually be able to implement short-term rental and the registration bylaw. How many units, just for my clarification, are we expecting to be reintroduced to the rental housing market as a result of these new regs?
The number that I've used in the past and through our various work with planning and others is around 5,000. It's the primary resident. So the key component of short-term rental is to be your primary residence and your primary residence only. And so this takes away those who have their primary residence and 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 investment properties, and you can only list one of those. So we feel strongly that a number of those investment properties will come off the market for short-term and hopefully made available for long-term.
So that is the intention of the policy. Could you walk me through what the enforcement process for that looks like?
So the enforcement process is, one, to have a clear set of rules for people to follow. If you want to participate in this area, you need to register with the City of Toronto. If we give you a registration number, once we validate that it is your primary residence, you can advertise on an Airbnb or a VRBO or any other platform that you so choose. And we, if you are not a registered number, we can be monitoring their websites, we can be looking through complaints, we can do a number of things through our database. And that's why it's important that this is built. The technology today is different than it was in 2017. We want to ensure we get this right, so we're ensuring we have the latest and greatest technology that allows us to take the data in and be able to disseminate it to do the enforcement that's expected by the communities and by yourselves.
And if residents had a concern about a particular property, what would be the process for them to have MLS follow up on it, and do we actually have the resources in place to do that?
So the process is through 311. If it's a complaint about a party house, we would go and we investigate. We do these, again, address by address. They are all unique, and we do have teams that work on them. Does it take away from their other work? The short answer is yes. But the other piece is really driving the enforcement through data and ensuring people are doing these through their primary residence and their primary residence only.
And I guess it could be challenging. Do we have the means to investigate whether or not something actually is a primary residence, or if somebody just puts, say, a name on a laneway house or something and indicates that that's a primary residence, but in fact somebody's not living there as a primary residence? How do you manage that?
Right, so that's That's a challenge we've identified early on. We know it's going to be difficult. We will be working with our partners in other levels of government. The key component is your driver's license issued by MTO, which we can use to validate. We are partnering also with Revenue Services because there's a municipal accommodation tax component here as well. So they have their own data on MPAC, and we have data on a number of residents in the City of Toronto that pay property taxes. So we have a number of different ways, and we will leverage all of those to determine if they are their primary residents, and then we will hold people accountable.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Nunziata.
Yeah, I just have two questions. With the clothing boxes, so have we been able to enforce all those illegal ones? And have you been able to do that, or did you need to get additional resources for that? Because I still see them all over garbage.
Yeah, so do I. As I drive through the neighborhoods and through your ward as well, I do see them.
I'm glad you drove through my ward. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Again, a challenging file. The ones that are not participating, the illegal ones, they continue to do so because there's a very low cost to them. If they lose it, they lose it. What we are doing is working with our colleagues in transportation and solid waste and purchasing to have a contract so that we can remove them. We, as a division, don't have the ability to, or the vehicles to do such, but we do need to do these blitzes regularly, and we do need to do a lot of public education of people donating clothing. Make sure you're donating it to the proper charities and not to these other charities and using it as a sign here. It means illegal dumping, which is what it's not intended to do.
Yeah, well, a lot of them are not bringing clothing, they're bringing waste to some of them. My next question is about cannabis. Have we received funding from the province as far as the enforcement end of it with some of these illegal ones? And so where are we at that point?
The city has received over $8 million, but this is spread around police, legal, ourselves, Toronto Public Health, and courts. So again, in this year, again, once we opted in, we received 2 tranches of $3 million each, roughly, and a lot of that goes to funding the work that we do with the police. We have been successful in closing down a number of these, over 80%. We still have, 8 to 10 illegal dispensaries that are still up and running. I think it's important here, again, the education component. Cannabis is legal, however, it's only legal if you buy it online and from a licensed provider from the province and not from the illegals, and those are the cafes of the world.
Yeah, so just one last question on that. So if someone applies for a location and so they file their application into the city, similar to a liquor license, and then we're given notice, and then they get approval. Like, what is the process?
Yeah, the application process is through the Alcohol Gaming and Commission of Ontario.
Right, but then it comes to the city.
There is a notice period where you and your community can provide input back to them. There's I believe it's 14 or 15 days.
Right.
The city's role in, we received those as well, and if we knew of illegal activity or problems at that property, we would identify that as well. If some of the illegal dispensaries had been at that location or had been involved with a new applicant, we do provide that information as well.
So really, we can't object to them. Like, it's not like a liquor license where we can put conditions. Like, they just get approved, right? Even if the community can comment, but at the end of the day, they get their license from the AGCO.
I think it's important to note that if you have concerns, the community and the local councillor should should submit that information to AGCO. What AGCO decides to do with it, I don't have.
Right. So we have no control of.
We as the city, no.
Yeah.
The ones that we have control over is where we are aware of people who've been involved in illegal dispensaries that are trying to move towards legal. We would share that information with the AGCO and with the police, and we have had success on those.
Okay.
Thank Thank you. Next, we'll go on to Toronto Fires. Oh, sorry, yeah. Councillor Perks, yes.
I found my notes eventually. I want to go to the topic of rooming houses, but not the piece about the potential for expanding them. I want to go to two other pieces. Over the years, we've had numerous conversations about the supports for the tribunal process and in making some investments in the increasingly complex enforcement problems we have across divisions, say in personal care rooming houses where we've got to include public health and fire and so on and so forth. And I've been assured many times over the last 3 years that those two areas where we haven't been delivering, we're going to see investments. Are those investments in this year, and where can I find them?
So the short answer, as far as an investment or a new and enhanced, that is, we do not have an ask. We continue to partner with Toronto Fire and Public Health on this. We recognize it is, we haven't solved the issue in the last 3 years, and it's something that we need to do, but we are doing it within existing resources.
So when you say doing it within existing resources, are you reassigning somebody who currently does something to do some of the cross-training that I've been promised repeatedly for 3 years?
So we are looking at the staff involved, we are looking at the administration of it, and we are working with the Affordable Housing Secretariat, as it's called now, and an opportunity for them to be more involved in the licensing administration of it. The pieces around how we do business processes and education is a piece we need to take on in partnership with our colleagues in fire and public health, and ensure that we are all following kind of the same steps when we are going out to these important homes and ensuring the tenants are in or have appropriate housing.
So I'm going to take that as a no. Is it also a no that what I've been promised for 3 years in terms of improving the supports for the functioning of the tribunal itself? Getting out the notices to neighbors, scheduling dates, ensuring that all that administrative work that I've been told would be enhanced over and over again for 3 years. Is there anything in this budget?
Not in our particular budget. We are trying to, again, partner with city clerks who has a lot of experience in administrating these types of tribunals and commissions when they are set up, that they are hired appropriately and they are, again, educated on the rules and responsibilities within the rooming house bylaw.
So clerks aren't here and I can't ask them, but I imagine you know the answer. Have they put any money in their budget for this function?
Not to my knowledge. It's something, an ongoing piece of work that we will commit to working with them, but I do not have, I guess, as a new or enhanced request.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, certainly this issue will be coming to the fore when we report back on multi-tenant homes. And it has been my commitment to you over the past 3 years that we were going to get resolution to this. So we are having going to be having more conversations about what we can do to bring action to it. I appreciate your frustration. I share it. We all share it. And certainly that does not speak to the lack of commitment we have to getting it resolved. It's simply been a matter of we need to focus and get it done. And that is going to be, you're going to see that when we come back with the report on multi-tenant homes later this year.
Thank you. Okay, next we'll go to Toronto Fire Services. Questions?
Yep. Let me just pull that up. Okay. In terms of the performance measures, I note that you have, sorry, they're trying to kick me out. The on-time performance metric that we use, of 90% within 6 minutes and 24 seconds. For the last 6 years, we've been underachieving that. It's supposed to be 90, and we've been achieving 82. Last year, it actually declined down to 81, and I see the projection continuing out at 82%. What is the plan, and where is it dealt with in this budget to get to the service standard for on-time response?
Through the chair, so you're correct, Councillor, in that there are two principal KPIs that are in place, established under NFPA 1710 for our performance. The first is total response time. That's the first truck arrival time. The second is what we call effective firefighting force. That's the amount of time it takes us to assemble the number of people on scene we need to actually fight the fire. So your assessment of that is correct. What I can say is there is a first time and a very important investment that is occurring and taking place in this budget in the form of the launch of what we've referred to as a value-based staffing pilot project. This is the first time that Toronto Fire Services will have funding available to begin to replace full-time personnel that are out of the workplace as a result of WSIB-approved illness and injury. By doing that, we are confident that not only will we stop that downward curve, but our projections are, in fact, that we will turn that curve and return in 2020 with a positive performance increase. So that's answer number one, Councillor. The second answer is we are in the midst now of what we refer to as an operations deployment review. That work is ongoing, and we have committed, in fact, we've been directed to report back to Council in advance of the 2021 budget process. That will be a comprehensive report that will look at all aspects of our service performance and will make any recommendations or make you aware of the details and the needs if we determine there's needs, any needs relating to our compliance, performance, and service delivery.
So if I understood that correctly, you're still going to be projecting that you aren't improving on that service metric, but there's going to be a report that will give us some advice on how to improve on it next year.
Just to clarify through the chair, we are projecting, based on the implementation of the value-based staffing pilot, we are projecting that there will be a service level performance. I believe it's projected at a 1% increase, so stopping the downward turn and improving that performance.
Well, that's returning to where you've been every other year.
That's correct.
It's not actually improving on the average you've had for the last 5 years.
That's correct. Like I said, Councillor, it's about stopping the downward turn.
We get this report.
Yes.
Okay. I noticed that the contribution to the vehicle reserve is taking a 1-year holiday, and that the intention is to pay double in next year. Did I understand that correctly?
That's correct. And through the chair, that's part of the work that our CFO and team led with respect to the capital recast. And in essence, Councillor, all that is harmonizing the actual projected cash flows against our ability to spend. So there's the amount of lead time required to procure heavy fire trucks.
It's not, I'm sorry, maybe the CFO can explain this to me. Capacity to spend and contribution to reserves are not related questions. Why are we taking $6 million? We normally contribute $6 million to the vehicle reserve. This year we're not doing it. We're taking a holiday, and next year we're paying in 12. That's not a capacity to spend problem. Why are we doing it?
Through the chair, so when we looked at what the capital spend was going to be, we'll look at what the capital spend is, and based on that, run a continuity schedule against the reserve to see when the money has to be contributed based on when it's going to be drawn. Through that review, we identified that $6 million contribution wasn't required this year, but we'd need it in the future years, and that was the adjustment that was made.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't the whole idea behind a reserve to smooth the capital costs so you don't pay it all at once? And the year after year after year, we've been contributing $6 million to the vehicle reserve for fire. The capital plan that I'm shown here says we're not going to put $6 million in this year, we're going to put 12 in next year.
So through the chair, when we were assessing our reserves, what we've actually tried to do is better understand supply and demand. So when is the demand required, and how much money is required to fund those demand as well as the commitments? And what we've been able to do is recast the amount that needs to be contributed in.
just going to ask Steve to confirm whether or not there's an anticipated doubling of the contribution next year.
There is. In the 2021 budget, we will be looking to ensure that we have enough money. Again, we would be running the continuity on the reserve based on what the expenditures are built into the capital program and ensure that adequate funds are there to enable for the draws.
Okay, thank you. Councillor, we'll bring it into committee then. Councillor Carroll, did you have questions?
Yes, so this really follows on with what I was asking yesterday. Long ago, we used to slap divisions on the hand who said, I could balance my budget if you just let me take a holiday from this vehicle reserve here. And we would tell them, no, you may not. In this recasting, have we somehow arrived at a different amount that is needed? Are fire trucks suddenly getting cheaper every year, such that we don't think we're going to need a big amount of money?
No, Councillor, they're absolutely not getting cheaper. As my colleague explained, it's really just a projection as to what the contribution needs to be in 2020 in order for us to actually spend the money and to spend the capital dollars against the trucks that are being ordered and the vehicles that are being both procured and replaced. And then once we get back into 2021, of course, that needs to be right-sized again.
So in the right sizing, your capital plan suddenly has to take a big jump to get ready for an order, and that money has to come from somewhere. Was 6 million an over contribution? Did you find that when we got to an order year, you had money left over?
Through the chair, no, it's not an over contribution, nor did we find ourselves in a position with too much money. There's about an 18-month from the time we initiate the procurement process for a heavy fire truck. It takes, but I would say on average 18 months in order for us to actually get it. So when we've gone through the exercise with our corporate finance colleagues at looking at the most efficient and most appropriate means of forecasting that cash flow and making sure that we're being appropriate and reasonable, not over-reserving but not under-reserving either.
So I'm just going to use an example to try and demonstrate this. We gnash our teeth a lot in this building because we don't keep a reserve for buying transit vehicles, for instance. And so when the time comes to buy them, we don't have enough money to buy them, and we have a big freak out and a media strategy, and we struggle for a couple of years, and finally we find other government partners and scare up the money to buy those transit vehicles. For these very service-related vehicles, fire trucks, garbage trucks, and all the rest, our fleet, our own fleet, we keep reserves because, correct me if I'm wrong, other orders of government don't buy fire trucks for all the municipalities, do they?
Through the chair, that's correct. They do not. The province does not buy fire trucks for municipalities.
And so that's why the normal practice in a fire service or a paramedic service or whatever is to have a vehicle reserve. There is no other partner there. So we reserve it so the day you need to order, there's some money in your savings account. Is that not the premise?
That's correct.
Okay, just making sure.
Thank you. Any other questions on fire services? I do have one quick, I just want a question to the CFO on trying to understand this whole recast, and this is a conversation that's probably going to happen on a number of the different ones. So can you just, again, what we're doing with these reserves is ensuring that we have the adequate amounts in the bank when we need to spend them, and with regard to fire services, when we have to spend money on fire trucks. So we're not actually saying we can't buy these trucks, we're just saying it's more like a cash flow. I'm just asking the CFO just to clarify this.
So yes, so what we have done is through more informed information, we are better able to project what cash requirements we have and when. And based, as Steve mentioned, on a continuity schedule of future projected anticipation of when our spends are needed, we have better aligned the need for resources to align with when we're going to spend them.
Okay.
So it's a supply and demand issue.
Thank you. You're correct. Councillor Layton was just here. Why don't we take a quick recess so we don't lose quorum? So we're just recessing right now? Apologies. Okay, thank you. The recess is, we had a brief recess due to quorum issues, so that's okay. Anyway, so why don't we continue? We're going to work, we're going to transportation services. Questions of staff on transportation services. Outside councillors first. Councillor Perks.
Yes. Could someone tell me in dollar amounts what the state of good repair backlog exclusive of the Gardner is at present and what it is projected to be at the end of the 10-year capital plan?
Through the chair, we're looking through our vast binders for that number, and we can tell you what that is. The SOGR what is the SOGR backlog for the Gardner now versus what will it be at the end of the 10-year period? So in 2019, the accumulated backlog is 1.069 billion, and by the end of the 2029 period, it will be 3.95 billion.
3.95?
Correct.
So it's almost quadrupled.
It has increased significantly, yes.
Okay. In the council budget debate last year, I put a motion forward which council approved that in time for this year's budget, you would bring a report on our on-street parking charges and how they relate to the market and whether there was room to increase them. I couldn't find that report in the budget launch. Where is it?
Through the chair, the parking report, we are in the process of doing an overall parking strategy. We did bring some increase in parking fees through this budget process, both for the residential on-street parking, both for the temporary and the monthly fees.
So you didn't bring the report that council directed on that?
We are rolling the overarching parking report into a parking strategy, which we will deliver to council in third quarter of 2020.
In future, it might be helpful if you're not doing what council's asked you to do for the budget year, to put in something in the notes so I know where it's going.
Okay.
Now, on the on-street parking fees, some of them are going up by more than inflation, but the core one, which is your plain vanilla, I'm just applying, I don't have a special circumstance, that's just inflationary. Am I right about that?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay. And just maybe to the clerks or somebody, I don't know, there are in some instances in which we increase fees where we have to have a statutory meeting. We don't have to do that for on-street parking, do we? Or legal or anybody? I know that for certain kinds of fees, we have to notify we have to put out a notice and have a meeting about that. Is that the case with this fee? Maybe I can get that answered later.
Yeah, I don't think they can answer that right now.
Through the chair, we can follow up further with legal, but I can say that as part of the budget process, notice is given on all fees in advance of the start of the budget process.
On all fees? So if we want to make any adjustments to any of the recreation fees or anything like that, council's forbidden from doing it? Or have you given a blanket notice which covers our right to do it?
There is a blanket notice at the start of the process that indicates that the budget is being considered, and as part of the budget are the user fees.
Are the user fees. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So if I were, for example, to look at the parking fee increase that's being applied to people who have access to a parking spot, and that's the special case, and that's been increased by some percentage, and say I want to apply the same percentage to all parking fees, on-street parking fees, I wouldn't need to give additional notice. I could just do that at council.
Through the chair, I believe so. I'd prefer to confirm with legal, but I believe
We
that's.
could get that confirmed. That would be very helpful.
I think they've said they
Thank
want
you.
that confirmed. Okay.
Those, I guess we're, well, and actually, no, I'm on the quadrupling of the state of good repair backlog for all the transportation except for the Gardner. When a road is in a poor state of repair, in other words, it's backlogged, the costs, we incur costs in terms of having to patch, having to pay out additional insurance claims for vehicles that, so on and so forth. On a sort of a life cycle basis, which costs us more? Keeping a road in a state of good repair, or pushing the repairs off so it enters into non-state of good repair and having to pay those management costs associated with that?
Through the chair, the best practice in paving management is to be able to catch the roads at a point where they've lived a fair amount of their service life, but before they require reconstruction. And so part of having a comprehensive asset management program, which we have recently upgraded with some significant data so that we actually know the state of good repair of our roads, is to be able to catch those roads at the right point so that we can ultimately lower the overall costs by getting the life cycle in the right place. So as you know, patching potholes over and over and over again or doing interim repairs is really a stopgap measure. The goal is that we have our roads on at a high level of pavement quality, higher than it is today. Most of our roads are 40 to 50 years old, and most of them are all coming due in terms of their updates, and trying to minimize the number of patches that we're doing and getting them at a place where we actually have them either resurfaced or the most expensive option is reconstruction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wong-Tam, do you have questions?
I do. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to understand the statement around no equity impacts in the transportation budget. How did you determine that there was no equity impacts based on what is before us today?
Through the chair, thank you for that question. The overarching statement around no equity impacts, I'm not going to be able to respond to directly. We believe that each of our program areas, when we are making modifications or even making decisions about how we spend dollars on transportation, does have the potential to improve the lives of equity-seeking groups. And so we have started, as I think you're aware of, doing a full equity analysis, including demographic data, built into all of our major projects. So certainly our Vision Zero plan was based on that. Our 10-year cycling update was based on that. And we will continue to do that analysis over time.
So would it be, am I correct to suggest that perhaps you need to update this budget note to reflect what those equity impacts are? Because only 3% of the transportation is going towards cycling infrastructure. 3% is going towards Vision Zero, which protects the most vulnerable road users. And so out of the quantum of this budget, only 6% is really targeting those who are going to be most vulnerable with respect to safety and access to roads. How can we say that there's no equity impact? Flip it.
Through the chair.
And can you provide an update to that?
Through the chair, I will certainly work with our corporate financial planning partners to look at that particular statement. statement. I just wanted to give a little bit of perspective on how we've defined the capital budget in terms of buckets. So 40% of stated good repair, some of which does include improvements and enhancements for our pedestrians and cyclists. And then the other piece of that is the growth projects, which are bucketed as 6% of the budget on growth projects. Nearly all of those projects have a significant investment for cycling and pedestrian infrastructure. And so taken all together, while it's still not where we hope to be in future years, it certainly is not, those three should be considered in an additive fashion.
And I appreciate that. Thank you for that explanation. I guess without knowing the disaggregated data piece, meaning who is actually using the roads, who are using the sidewalks, how do you keep everybody safe? Who are actually the drivers? Are they predominantly particular gender? Do they predominantly belong to a particular group of individuals? You'll never really be able to dig deeper into understanding and putting the equity lens over budgeting until you actually get to disaggregated data. So unless we dig deeper, and I'm going to suggest that before any division puts forward a statement that says there's no equity impact, they need to really understand who their client base is, who their customers are, because if you don't know how you're delivering the service to who is being affected and who's getting service and who's not getting service, then it's very difficult, would you not say, to then absolutely state in black and white text that there's no equity impact.
Through the chair, understood. I believe that deep dive that is so necessary that you describe is something that we did as part of the Vision Zero plan with the impetus of looking at our most vulnerable users in the places where we were seeing the most killed and serious injury crashes in Scarborough. But as part of that, we did an assessment of all the 4 districts of the city to be able to use as a comparator. And I don't think that's where we stop. I think that's where we start, because to your point, many of the people that we try to reach through education and engagement, we need to know who those cohorts are in order to tailor those messages. So I think we have more work to do there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Take it into committee. Questions? Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, page 26, Appendix 5, 10-year capital plan funding for cycling infrastructure. Just want to confirm that we're putting $16.8 million into the cycling infrastructure budget in 2020.
That's correct.
Okay. Same line, project code TS021, spending in 2022 decreases by half to 8.3 million each year. Is this based on the 3-year term of our cycling network plan?
Through the chair, it's partly based on that, and it's partly based on a change in the infrastructure funding for cycling from the provincial government, which phases out after 2020, and funding for cycling infrastructure from the federal government, which phases out after this year as well.
Interesting. Okay, so when we've got the 16.8 in this year, that is showing money that's transferred to us from the feds and the province? Is that why it's 16.8 versus 8.3 in subsequent?
In the 16.8, 12.42 of that is the Ontario Municipal Cycling Fund, which 20% is city dollars and 80% is provincial dollars.
Okay, so then actually is our share, the city share of spending, going up in following years because we're getting less from the province?
That's correct, and it would be proposed to be brought into the budget once those projects are defined and costed in order to keep in line with council's direction around the funding level for cycling infrastructure.
Okay, good to know.
Just to add to that, so that's reflected in the below-the-line submission for those subsequent years for 2022 onwards. There's $7.7 million below the line for cycling, which we would intend to then bring above the line.
Okay, we will need to watch that. The cycling community, myself included, has been talking about the 3 kilometers of bike lanes installed in 2019 and how we can meet the goals set out in our cycling network plan. I just want to confirm one more time that we do not have capital constraints with respect to the cycling network plan for our planning and delivery of that infrastructure in 2020 and 2021.
That's correct, Councillor.
Okay, very good.
Through the chair, I'm sorry, I just wanted to be clear about actually what we did deliver in 2019, which was not 3.3 kilometers of cycling facilities.
The new kilometers of cycling infrastructure was close to 10, and the upgrades was a major part of the program in order to achieve safety improvements, which was about 34 kilometers.
Of upgrades? Okay. You know, we're not where we want to be on Vision Zero, of course. 2019 is a long way from the mark. But I know we're all working very, very hard on that. With 3% of our 10-year capital plan being dedicated to Vision Zero, can you walk me through how the division went about spending the budget priorities for Vision Zero related to other projects? So, for example, in our new and enhanced, we have 15 positions recommended for Vision Zero implementation and 11 to implement the capital projects. How do we land on that split?
Through the chair, thanks for that question. So we did ask for staff in 2019 as well. That staff was largely focused on community safety zone enhancements as well as signs and lines, which was again about getting our community safety zones in place. The staff that we're asking for this year is really focused on geometric safety improvements, traffic signals and system operations, because part of the value and learning that we had through our Vision Zero 2.0 plan update is so many of the people who are impacted are impacted at mid-block locations. And so some of the solutions that we've seen in our plan that we want to implement as quickly as we can are reflected in this staff ask.
Okay, very good. That's good to hear. 2019, just back on that federal provincial government split in terms of subsidy, is it correct to say that 2019 federal government contributed $12.5 million in capital funding?
No, that was the provincial figure.
That was the provincial figure. Okay. Have they given any indication on why the 2020 contribution is slated at zero? Or are we having conversations with them about renewing that funding or making a new funding ask from them?
There is no new provincial funding for cycling infrastructure on the table. This was a 3-year program by the previous provincial government. This is now the last year of that.
Okay. And with respect to the federal piece, are we anticipating seeing more money from the federal government with respect to this?
There haven't been any specific commitments from the federal government at this time. The funding that we have been using for cycling infrastructure, applying to cycling infrastructure, was the Federal Public Transit Infrastructure Fund, of which some was for active transportation. And that fund expires this year in March of 2020.
Last question real quick. Do we specify the breakdown of the PTIF funding on how much of that goes to capital transit projects in a traditional sense and the active transportation or cycling piece? Who decides that, or do they just say, here's the money, do with it what you will?
Through the chair, so with regards to the initial PTIF program, there was an initial intake process where we identified the available funding and which projects that would be eligible for the program.
The city did.
The city did, in cooperation with the TTC, and we identified the split. I don't happen to have the split handy on me, exactly what it was, but it was predominantly TTC and transportation projects.
Who's putting up their hand for active transportation projects? So between TTC and the city, I know it's my last question, who's putting up their hand and saying active transportation?
For the most part, transportation services. There were some funds for active transportation for bike parking that the TTC also included in their programming.
Okay, thanks very much, and thanks for the additional time.
Next, who would like to ask questions? Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Transportation had spoken, I believe, last year that you were doing some reorganization internally and looking at the way you're doing scheduling. Can you just speak to that and where you're at in that process, and has that realized any sort of efficiencies that you're starting to see and realize?
Through the chair, thanks very much for that question. Yes, we embarked on a full divisional reorganization in 2017, and I'm happy to say that we have made the last transition of staffing this year. So we have completely restructured our division to a functional model, and we have seen we've had the ability to look very specifically about where we need our staffing and how we need to structure our teams in order to focus on delivery and also in order to be quite specific and strategic about how we look at and examine our future year programs and projects. And while we haven't, other than new program asks, we have done that within our existing complement. So we have moved a fair number of positions around. I'll take Jacqueline's team as an example. She oversees design and project management. Previously, all of the design work that happened in the division happened in many different places, and there was a lot of coordination needed. The bulk of that work now happens in her team. She is also has a group, both Vision Zero and for the cycling network and pedestrian projects, that are specifically focused on delivery and working on improving processes within the division and with our partners at ECS and with the contractor community to deliver those benefits faster.
So overall, do you feel like this is enhanced your ability to procure and adhere to schedule, and that some of these historical delays that we've been seeing, going forward, it's getting better?
Through the chair, absolutely. And I think we're going to start to see the benefits of those in future years, especially on some of these more significant program areas like Vision Zero and the cycling plan. But I will say that we have been working, same team, but in different seats, pretty diligently on our improving our ability to spend capital. And this year we've seen a very significant jump. I think last year it was 55.5%, and this year it's almost 82% in terms of our ability to spend on our existing capital program.
Okay, that is a really big improvement, so congratulations. On Vision Zero, your staff provided an excellent report to the Infrastructure and Environment Committee that looked at the different programs that were happening in front of the school zones and made some very good recommendations on how we should be deploying those resources to protect our youth. In particular, it was pointed out that mid-block crossings were continuing to be a significant problem and that you would be taking steps through this budget to accelerate that. Could you roll out what that is and what sort of money you're asking for increases on this year in that respect?
Through the chair, so as you've seen in our budget ask, we're requesting 15 positions and the funding to support those. 2 of those positions are specifically aimed at addressing signals and improving and enhancing our delivery of signals focused on the mid blocks, but also at the intersections, because in many of the locations where people are being killed or seriously injured, those are the second biggest tranche is at signalized intersections. So making improvements there. Again, that's not only on the operations side or the design side, but it's also on the delivery side, so trying to move those pieces forward faster. The other piece that I don't want to underscore is the dollars that are in there for the partnership with the police on the enforcement program. We've partnered with them in order to increase their capacity to help to manage and enforce speed, especially, and they've already started that program. They're using data from our Vision Zero plan in order to target speed enforcement, and they've rolled that out in Scarborough to start, and we'll continue to move those efforts around the city.
And then my last question is speaking specifically to Scarborough and recognizing that it has a higher percentage of fatalities or killed and seriously injured. How does the budget reflect that need might be greater in different parts of the city? Is there a breakdown by section of the city for how funds on Vision Zero are being deployed?
Well, thank you for that question. So first, I did want to update just previously that we also have an additional amount that is actually for signal delivery. About 1.2 million additional for signal delivery. The Scarborough Safety Action Plan did an analysis and an assessment of the factors that contribute to and the data that we're tracking around pedestrian and cyclist safety. And Scarborough certainly has the biggest, most significant jump in terms of people who are being impacted by those crashes. We are prioritizing our programs. As you know, many of our programs, especially for the larger capital investments, are coordinated across multiple areas, and they often take a number of years to be able to get out on the street. So as we have that plan, the Vision Zero 2.0 plan, we are rethinking how we do that investment prioritization. So again, you'll see some of that in future years, because in this year and in the next couple of years, but you'll certainly see more of that coming in 2022 and beyond.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Layton?
Yes, thank you very much. And again, kudos on your increasing your capacity to spend rate so much in just such a short time. Just to break that number down a little bit, do you have, or is it possible to get numbers about the spend rates in cycling infrastructure and in Vision Zero infrastructure?
Through the chair, we can certainly get the latest for you. We have it broken down by state of good repair. If you haven't, do you have any other questions we can look for?
Sure. So the other questions.
Most wisely.
One specifically on in the safety, we talk about the KSI, which seems to be on a reasonable, like a positive trajectory for next year, although the final numbers aren't in yet. Do we know when those final numbers are going to come in?
Through the chair, we do have those final numbers, certainly for fatals in 2019. For pedestrians, we were at 39 as opposed to 41 in 2018. For cyclists, we were at 1 fatality in 2019 and 4 for the previous year. The serious injuries are, continue to kind of be on par. I think what we've tried to tell, the story that we tried to tell in our KPIs are that we are on a downward trend, even though we certainly have a lot more work to do, but we are on a downward trend in terms of killed and serious injury crashes, especially pegged against population growth.
So I'm just wondering why you don't break out the fatalities in the KSI measurement on your behind the numbers page.
Yeah, through the chair, we certainly have that information and can provide that information. We can certainly get that to you for the last 10 years, actually.
Okay, thank you. On the winter maintenance file, are we still on track to deliver the pilot winter maintenance program for sidewalks in the downtown core?
Through the chair, we are. In fact, I just met with staff yesterday to look at the maps pegged where the senior housing is across the city and the wards that don't currently have that clearing. We have 4 of the 8 machines currently here, and we'll start to roll that program forward as soon as we have the full complement. We're also going to get information out to the councillors on where that trial is going to take place in advance of starting.
It hasn't been a ton of snow this year, so I think we got lucky with probably a late start, but it'll come.
Good news.
So do we know how many kilometers that will be now that we've had done the analysis?
We believe we'll be able to do about 250 kilometers.
250 kilometers. That's higher than what we had thought.
Correct.
At the end. That's great. And that's budgeted for within the existing contract, or no? We added that. That was an additional.
We're actually using in-house staff to do that
Okay.
program, so it was just a cost of the equipment.
Fantastic.
Sorry, Councillor, and I can answer your delivery questions around cycling and road safety plan, Vision Zero. So cycling is 60% and road safety plan 85%.
Sorry?
Vision Zero 85.
85. Sorry, I just caught the 5. And
Sorry,
I didn't
yeah,
get that.
85, yes.
That's good.
Thank you for clarifying.
Is there a reason why the cycling delivery rate was so low? And I'm not trying to catch you here in anything. I know how difficult and complex implementing some of these projects are. It's just sometimes I know that if we did have more staff on the delivery project management side of things, we may be able to advance them faster. So is there a reason why?
Yes, through the chair. Most projects are proceeding as scheduled, but there were some projects experiencing delays due to coordination and complexity of the design and third-party approval issues, particularly for the Public Transit Infrastructure Fund, PTIF-funded cycling projects, which are significant in scale, the lower down trail widening construction and the Western Rail Path design in coordination with Metrolinx, Eglinton Connect. So those are major projects that will result in future kilometers delivered, but are very complex at this stage.
Back on the service levels for snow clearing, and did we really never track service requests for sidewalk, driveways, bus stops, and walkways? Because on the service level, and thank you to the various staff who sent me the report on service levels. The one that says new service, that says new service level, so we don't have any past data. I'm just like have we never been tracking the number of calls we've gotten about sidewalk clearing and or didn't have a service standard for it?
Through the chair, we have. I'm not sure what exactly you're referring to, but we have been tracking those service levels. Let's see if I have anything.
It's page 53.
Oh, I see what you're
Under
saying.
sidewalk, bus stops, and walkway complaints, there's a big no service level.
So through I understand now what you're saying. So the service level that we have been delivering that we will continue to do moving forward is 2 centimeters. So we go out to do those sidewalks, driveways, bus stops, and walkway complaints.
Thank you.
Regardless of the volume.
I think I'm asking something different, but I can ask offline. I'm just looking at this now, so I'll maybe wrap up.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to do a quick time. We have about 15 more minutes. We have a number of different divisions, so I'm just going to ask, we also have police coming up at 1:30. So I just want to run down quickly if there are any questions of any of these divisions, and if not, then maybe they can be excused. So let me run down. And questions on engineering and construction services? Okay, we have one. Policy and emergency management. Policy, planning, finance, and administration. Okay, we have no questions on that one. Toronto Building. Toronto Expansion Office. Transit expansion. Yeah, that. Waterfront revitalization. Waterfront revitalization, do we have any? Okay, so on those, well, just on the two anyway, the PPF&A and water revitalization won't be needed after lunch. Just, well, we can actually, we got 15 minutes, so let's see how, so why don't we do, let's just work our way down, engineering and construction, outside councilors, perks first, I believe. If we can whip a few of these off, that'd be great.
I am looking at the analyst notes for ECS. I'm looking at page 8, table 2, which is the key drivers. I'm looking at salaries and benefits, and there's a note saying that the increase there is for inflation and 17 new positions and enhanced vacancy management. So my question is this. I want to return to one of my annual hobby horses, which is when we do major construction projects, road repair, etc., we hire a contractor to do the project, and then we hire a consultant to manage the contractor, and we run into problems where if there's a delay, the contractor blames the consultant blames the contractor, and everyone just gets mad. And in previous years, I've asked whether we wouldn't be better to have city staff manage contractors, and I've been told that we have had trouble with talent, attracting, retention, and training. Does this salary and benefit plan that you have here in any way deal with that ongoing hobby horse of mine?
Through the chair, I can tell you that year over year we have significantly increased our vacancy count, and so we are making some headway in that regard. The plan for this year is that we're working very closely with our colleagues in People and Equity, thank you, in regards to a wholesale review of the compensation levels, particularly for some of our key positions, to your point. You know, as was stated earlier on by our Deputy City Manager, you know, the construction industry is it's very active at this point, and the forecast for the next 10 years continues growth in that area. So, you know, we're at a competitive disadvantage from a salary compensation. So there is work that has started, and our hope is that by the end of this year there'll be a correction, certainly for some of our key positions. To answer your question in regards to when do we hire project managers external, we've been quite strategic on, I'll say, on our local roads or work within the municipal right-of-way. Most of that work is done through in-house expertise. Where there has been a bump up, as was referenced in the DCM's presentation, we've gone external just from a capacity standpoint. But our hope is on the go forward that if we can narrow the gap with respect to our vacancies, a lot more of that work will be done in-house.
So if I heard you correctly, we're not all the way there. You are working on it, and we hope to have something in for next year.
Through the chair, it's our expectation, based on the analyst note, or based on the budget notes that you've seen, is that we actually narrow the gap with respect to the vacancies, and to a large extent that will be attributed to the work that we're doing with with people and equity in regards to the compensation levels.
So if I were to ask for, I don't even know where your report, Works and Infrastructure, I guess. If I were to ask that sometime before the 21 budget that you report on how you're doing on this, you'd be able to?
Through the chair, certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Carroll.
Well, I wasn't going to, but this kind of brings it up. So we're struggling with this. We're going to get a report back on it. And it's not directly related to the budget right now. But I just want to note at this juncture that one of the things that we encounter when we go out to the colleges, whether private or the public colleges, where they're teaching such things as capital project management and the accounting of, and et cetera, some of them note that it's hard for them to develop a co-op arrangement or partnership with the city. Is that something that you would need to be resourced to be able to do, or are they really just whining and you do in fact engage in those partnerships to help build the amount of people that will be able to do this work?
Through the chair, we've embarked on a number of recruitment strategies. Co-op is one. We have also engaged with the universities with respect to their program as well, so that we have students that are at some point through their engineering program to come in and work with us. We made a concerted effort to augment our resources during the summertime with part-time inspectors, if you will. So we've undertaken, we'll continue to look at opportunities to engage, certainly at the universities and the colleges, to bring those individuals in, and then ultimately, once they graduate, there will be opportunities for them within our organization, is our hope.
And do we have actual MOUs in place such that those things can be accessed quickly? Because what some say is what they'd like to have is an agreement in place so that they could help fill gaps much more quickly.
Through the chair, that'll be something that we look at as well, whether we formalize. Currently, it's been on an informal basis. We've reached out to the community colleges and the universities, but certainly to your point with respect to some of the community colleges and some of our technicians, technologists, our survey crews, that is a route that we need to look at, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bradford? Okay. Seeing no questions, let's go on next to Office of Emergency Management. Councillor Perks, I believe you'd indicated. Question?
Yes, and I'm sorry I haven't read up on this completely. We are experiencing and projecting many more weather-related emergencies, temperature being the one that frightens me the most. What work has your office done to prepare for that?
Through the chair, we're meeting with the flood resiliency working groups and others, key members within the city, to start looking at risk analysis and identifying what areas we need to focus on and start developing plans for that.
So we don't have those plans in place, and we don't have the budget for building out the resources we would need, but rather that's work you intend to do in the future.
This is all work in progress.
Work in progress. So I hate to put the question this way, but it is, the City of Toronto produced Ahead of the Storm in 2009, 10 years ago, where we cataloged the concerns around increased flooding, the risks to our water infrastructure, the risks of massive heat waves such as those that have been experienced in Central Europe and continental United States. And here we are 10 years later, and it's a work in progress. What is it going to take and to beef up our ability to deal with weather-related emergencies?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I'll take that answer. So Councillor Perk, certainly through the resilience strategy, the issue of urban flooding, the heat islands that we can experience in our city is top of mind. Just this week, the Director of OEM, myself, our resilience lead, and a member of Toronto Water spoke about the next steps on advancing on a flood tool. So absolutely, from a resilience standpoint across the city, it is absolutely in focus. Yes, we do have work to do on it, but we do have foundational work done in respect to heat, certainly the heat relief network and the efforts taken there, as well as through our green streets and other programs that are focused on resilience needs. So it's absolutely a focus area. I did not do it justice in the presentation. I was trying to roll up 10 divisions into one, but to say that resilience is on front plate for this.
Fair enough. Could we expect, as part of the report on the updating Transform TO or at some other place, an in-year report that says these are the weather conditions that we're expecting, and the piece that I always see neglected is heat. And here is our strategy for emergency preparedness. And Council, this is what it's going to cost you to be ready.
So through you, Mr. Chair, the short answer is yes, sir. Certainly from an adaptation mitigation standpoint, but also what there is necessary for us to be ready from an emergency management response standpoint. It is a large body of work that needs to be done. It does really focus on, in my view, the issue of urban flooding, and Councillor Nunziata knows that quite keenly, the issue of heat and how those two things coincide, as well as the issue of heat related to our tall towers and resilience in our neighborhoods. So, and Councillor Wong Tam certainly can relate to that. So all of those things will be coming back as it relates to, and that's a conversation DCM Scioli and I are having on how this relates and can come together with the environment work and Transform TO.
Well, okay, I'll say it one more time, heat. I mean, Public Health put out a report, I think it was 6 years ago, that found that several 100,000 Torontonians would be at risk if we got the kind of 4-day above 35-degree weather that everyone projects we're going to start experiencing routinely.
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. In fact, we recently undertook a bit of an exercise on how the city would respond, our level of readiness if we had a prolonged heat event. So heat and the heat relief network and the commitment to us continuing to find opportunities to provide relief in the instances of extreme heat is absolutely one of the pillars of this strategy and work going forward.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, quickly, we may have time for one set of questions on Toronto Building. Who has questions on Toronto Building?
I just wanted to highlight, in Toronto Building, I just wanted to know if there are any updates needed here in terms of cost recovery projections, because we were discussing in economic development the other day that there's suddenly been a downturn in activity, in people picking up building permits, in requirements for inspection and things like that. Even though it seems like we're bustling, we suddenly saw this dip, whether it's created by the sector holding its breath because of Bill 108 or whatever. Do all the projections here still stand?
Through the chair, the short answer is yes. We're not seeing any significant changes as a result.
Just a question I'm just wondering if it makes sense just to extend a little bit to get this group done. You had Councillor, you have Toronto Building questions?
Yeah, I can be quick, and that's all I got.
Okay, and then Councillor Burks, you had one? Okay, so let's extend just to finish these two. Sounds as if they'd be quick, so motion to move to extend. All opposed? Approved? That's carried. No, police is after lunch. This is just, I want to get through this division, or this sector. Councillor Bradford.
Okay, thanks. I'll try and be quick. I'd like to thank, Will and his team for all the tremendous work they've done over the past year since I've become a councillor. we've been working with Toronto Building very closely as a result of some of the bridge stuff in Crescent Town. And I wanted to talk about the proactive inspections and enforcement. I know that we're doing everything we can to advance the proactive stuff, enforcement and inspections on bad actors. When I look at the budget on page 10 for 2021 and 2022 outlook, I see that we're trying to keep the costs down and stay lean, and we're going to shift around some of the people who are currently working on transit expansion projects right now. That's my understanding of it. My question is how we're thinking about increasing that enforcement for the bad property owners, for the people that need to proactively, us to go out and do that work, to coordinate across divisions, to make sure that nothing's slipping through the cracks, and that we are actually proactively on top of this in advance of issues arising.
Through the chair, this is an area that we are quite interested in, and we have our dedicated enforcement unit that is working on developing a lot of these proactive strategies. That group will continue, and that work will keep moving in that regard. The other place that there's an opportunity for a more significant advancement is Toronto Building's undergoing a program review, which is looking at the way we deliver our services. And we'll probably be resetting, or we've engaged the services of a consultant to help us through that process, and we're expecting the results of that in the middle of this year. One of the key components of that program review is, with the help of the consultant, is to look for further opportunities to move our services so that they are more proactive, so that we are getting ahead of a lot of these issues as opposed to always reacting to them.
So we have a consultant reporting back on how we can improve that process, and you're going to see that report in 2020?
That's correct. So towards the middle of 2020.
Is that going to be coming to infrastructure? Where would that go? Infrastructure and Environment, or who sees that?
So that report will go to Planning and Housing Committee.
Okay. And then just kind of actually, that's a good segue following up on that. So I'm really obviously interested in the structural stuff, like our garages, our pedestrian bridges. We need to be proactive on that. I'm also interested in how we're lining up on some of our policy goals, like protecting tenants in rental properties, protecting tenants in affordable housing, and all the enforcement issues. This might be a broader MLS question, but how we're merging those things.
So through the chair, I would say it is probably a more broader question. What I can speak to in Toronto Building is where there's an opportunities for us to help in that regard, we do move in and help on that. Also through our program review, which is going to look at all of our services, that could be something could come out of that program review as a result of that.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Any other questions on that? Seeing none, we'll go to the last, which is transit expansion. Councillor Perks, you had a question.
But let's have lunch.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so just to let everybody, I know Councillor Layton's not here afterwards. He has something to go in his ward. Just want to make sure everybody here is back at 1:30 for quorum issues. I think we're fine. But we have police, actually just police after lunch with a presentation, and then Toronto Atmospheric Fund, Police Services Parking Enforcement Unit, and Police Services Board at 1:30. So we recess till 1:30.